Hello, and welcome back to Stories for Sleep. Tonight, as the world outside gradually grows quieter, as the final sounds of a long day begin to settle into silence, we are about to embark on a very special journey together. Not a journey to a distant land, not a voyage through history or an exploration of the mysteries of the universe. Instead, it is a journey into one of the most remarkable abilities human beings have ever possessed: empathy. Perhaps there has been a moment in your life when you felt a little lighter because someone looked at you and said, "I understand how you feel." Perhaps a compassionate glance, a silent nod, or simply the presence of someone willing to sit beside you without judgment helped you through some of your most difficult days. And perhaps there have also been moments when you wondered why the sadness of a stranger could touch your heart, why a story on a screen could bring tears to your eyes, or why simply being near a calm and peaceful person could gradually quiet your own mind. According to Carl Gustav Jung, human beings do not exist as isolated islands. Beneath our differences in language, culture, and life circumstances lie invisible threads that connect us to one another. He believed that there are deeper layers of the psyche shared by all of humanity, and perhaps empathy is one of the doors that leads us toward that connection. In tonight's video, we will explore some of the most relaxing and fascinating truths about empathy. We will discover how the brain is designed to sense the emotions of others, why feelings can spread from one person to another, why listening often heals more deeply than giving advice, and what happens when a society chooses understanding over judgment. This is not a dry lecture on psychology. It is a story about connection, about the things that make us human, about our ability to recognize ourselves within the experiences of others. And perhaps, as you listen to these stories, you may come to understand a little more about yourself as well. If you enjoyed gentle explorations of depth psychology, philosophy, history, science, and the reflective insights of Carl Jung that help you relax before sleep, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can join Stories for Sleep on future journeys. And now, find a comfortable position. Allow your shoulders to soften. Let the thoughts of today slowly drift into the background. And join me as we begin exploring one of the most beautiful mysteries of the human soul. A mystery called empathy. Part 1. What is empathy, really? Tonight, before we talk about the brain, science, or modern psychological research, perhaps we should begin with a very simple question. What is empathy, really? It is a word that nearly all of us have heard countless times. We speak about empathy in families, in friendships, in love, in education, in the workplace, and sometimes we hear it mentioned in discussions about how to make the world a kinder place. Yet the more familiar a concept becomes, the more difficult it can sometimes be to grasp. Because if someone asked us to explain exactly what empathy is, many of us might hesitate for a few seconds. Is empathy feeling another person's pain? Is it understanding them? Is it helping them? Or is it simply listening? Perhaps the answer is all of these things, and yet not entirely any one of them. Imagine a quiet evening. A friend is sitting across from you. They have just experienced an incredibly difficult day. Perhaps they have lost something important. Perhaps they feel disappointed. Perhaps they are carrying a loneliness that no one else can see. In that moment, you cannot step into their mind. You cannot live their life. You cannot feel exactly what they are feeling. And yet, somehow, you can still touch their experience. You can see the sadness in their eyes. You can hear the exhaustion in their voice. You can sense that something is happening within them. That is where empathy begins. Not by becoming another person, but by expanding your own inner world enough to create space for someone else's experience. According to Carl Gustav Jung, one of humanity's greatest illusions is the belief that we are completely separate from one another. In everyday life, each person carries a unique name, a unique story, a unique past, a unique personality, and this makes us feel like independent individuals. But Jung believed that beneath these differences lies a deeper layer, a psychological realm shared by all human beings. He called it the collective unconscious. In the book of life, each of us may be reading different chapters, but all of us are written in the same emotional language. We all know what joy feels like, what loss feels like, what hope feels like, what fear feels like, what love feels like. And it is this profound similarity that forms the foundation of empathy. Perhaps that is why a film can bring millions of people to tears, why a song can touch the hearts of people who have never met, or why a story unfolding on the other side of the world can still move us deeply, not because we are living the same life, but because somewhere deep within, we share the same human experiences. What is fascinating is that empathy is not simply an emotion. Many people assume that empathy means feeling sad when someone else is sad, but reality is far richer than that. Some people empathize through the heart. They are deeply affected by the emotions of others. They can feel another person's pain almost as if it were their own, but others empathize through understanding. They do not necessarily need to cry with you. They do not need to experience the exact same emotions, yet they can still understand what you are going through. They know how to listen, how to ask thoughtful questions, how to be present. And sometimes, that quiet form of empathy becomes the greatest gift of all. Carl Jung once wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." Perhaps this is one of the most beautiful statements ever made about empathy, because empathy does not begin with understanding others. It begins with understanding ourselves. Those who have experienced sorrow are often better able to recognize sorrow. Those who have felt abandoned are often better able to recognize loneliness. Those who have endured disappointment are often better able to recognize hurt. The wounds that have healed within our own lives sometimes become bridges that allow us to reach others. And perhaps there is something deeply human about that, because the hardships we experience do not merely create suffering. They also expand our capacity to love, our capacity to understand, our capacity to connect. Yet empathy is not only a beautiful feeling, it is also the foundation of nearly every form of cooperation in human history. Imagine for a moment what would happen if human beings were completely unable to understand one another's emotions. What would families become? What would friendships become? What would love become? How could a community survive if no one could recognize another person's pain or needs? It is entirely possible that the civilization we know today would never have emerged. Because before there were laws, before there were governments, before there were the complex systems of modern society, there existed a far simpler ability, the ability to recognize that others feel as we do, that others hurt, that others fear, that others hope, that others need love. And from that realization, compassion was born, cooperation was born, the first communities were born. Perhaps that is why empathy is not merely an additional skill. It is one of the deepest foundations of what it means to be human. And surprisingly, this ability is not fixed. It can grow, but it can also fade, like a garden that requires care, like a muscle that must be exercised, like a flame that must be nourished. Every sincere conversation, every moment when we truly listen, every attempt to see the world through another person's eyes, empathy grows a little stronger, quietly, gently, yet powerfully. And perhaps in today's world, where everything seems faster, louder, and more judgmental, nurturing empathy is not simply an act of kindness, it is also an act of courage, a way of reminding ourselves that behind every face lies a story. Behind every action lies a pain or a hope we have not yet seen. And behind every human being, there is always an inner world far larger than anything visible on the surface. Part 2. The brain and body are designed for empathy. As we concluded the previous section, we arrived at a rather beautiful idea. That empathy is not merely a moral virtue, not merely a choice, not merely a kind behavior that human beings learn as they grow older, but something deeper, something that appears to be woven into human nature itself. Yet this leads us to a new question, an even more fascinating one. If empathy is so important, does it exist only as an idea within the mind, or has it been engraved into our bodies long before we learned language? Is empathy a cultural invention, or is it part of our biology? As the night continues to drift quietly beyond the window, imagine a very simple scene: a baby resting in its mother's arms. The child cannot speak, cannot understand complex concepts, has never read a psychology book, has no idea what empathy means, and yet, simply through the sound of the mother's voice, the baby's heart rate can begin to slow. Simply through an embrace, the child's body becomes calmer. Simply through the presence of another human being, the entire nervous system begins to change. That suggests something profound. Perhaps our capacity for connection emerged before language, before reason, before what we call conscious thought. Over the past several decades, neuroscience has uncovered remarkable insights into how human beings connect with one another. And the more scientists study the subject, the more they realize that empathy is not a mystical miracle. It is a biological phenomenon, an ability woven into the very architecture of the brain and body. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." This is not merely poetic imagery. Today, science suggests that Jung touched upon something remarkably close to biological reality. Because when two human beings genuinely connect, something truly changes. Not only in the mind, but in the brain itself, in the body itself, in the tiny electrical signals constantly flowing through the nervous system. One of the most fascinating discoveries is a phenomenon researchers call neural synchronization. The term sounds complex, but the idea is surprisingly simple. When two people engage in a meaningful conversation, their brain activity begins to resemble one another's. Regions involved in emotion, language, attention, even certain patterns of brainwave activity may begin moving in similar ways. In a sense, two brains begin to dance together. This does not mean they are thinking exactly the same thoughts. Rather, they are entering the same psychological space. Like two people listening to the same piece of music, each experiences it differently, yet both are being carried by the same melody. Perhaps that is why we sometimes feel that someone truly understands us. Not because they possess perfect answers, but because, for a moment, two minds have met. They have shared the same rhythm. They have stepped into the same emotional current. Yet the story becomes even more extraordinary. Because it is not only the brain, the body itself participates in this invisible conversation. Think back to the last time you sat beside someone who was deeply stressed. Perhaps they said nothing. Perhaps they tried to appear completely normal. Yet somehow, you still sensed that something was wrong. Perhaps their shoulders were tense, their breathing slightly faster, their gaze less focused, their voice carrying an unusual strain. And before long, you found yourself feeling tense as well. What is happening? Is it merely intuition? Or is there something deeper at work? Modern science suggests that the human body is constantly reading social signals, even when we are completely unaware of it. Every facial expression, every shift in tone of voice, every subtle movement of the body is sending information, and another person's nervous system is continuously receiving it, quietly, rapidly, automatically. We often imagine that communication happens through words, but in truth, much of human conversation occurs beneath language, in glances, in silence, in breathing patterns, in posture, in the way our bodies respond to one another. Researchers often observe a fascinating phenomenon. When two people feel comfortable together, they begin unconsciously mirroring each other. One person tilts their head, the other does the same. One person smiles, the other smiles. One person lowers their voice, the other begins speaking more softly. This phenomenon is often called mirroring, yet from a deeper perspective, It resembles an invisible dance of connection. No one plans it. No one consciously decides to do it. It simply happens. Because the body is trying to communicate something. I am here. I am listening. I am connected with you. And perhaps this explains why some people make us feel comfortable from the very first meeting. Not necessarily because of what they say, but because of the way their presence allows our nervous system to feel safe. In modern psychology, a growing body of research suggests that a sense of safety is one of the foundations of empathy. When the body feels threatened, the nervous system shifts into survival mode. Attention narrows. Fear increases. Our capacity to understand others diminishes. But when we feel safe, the mind opens. Curiosity emerges. The ability to connect becomes activated, and empathy begins to bloom. Perhaps this is one of the most beautiful truths about being human. That beneath all our differences, our bodies are designed to seek connection, designed to read emotions, designed to resonate with one another. Like instruments within the same orchestra, each instrument has its own unique sound, yet when they play in harmony, they create a symphony greater than any individual part. And once we understand this, empathy no longer feels distant or abstract. It becomes something natural, something deeply human, something very close to home. Because perhaps, from the very first days of life, long before we learned to speak, long before we understood the world, our bodies already knew one thing. We were not born to exist alone. We were born to connect. Part 3. How do emotions spread? As we concluded the previous section, we arrived at a rather beautiful realization that the human brain and body seem to be designed for connection, that behind every sincere conversation, behind every understanding glance, behind every moment when we feel truly heard, an entire biological system is quietly at work. Brains synchronizing with one another, breaths influencing one another, bodies reflecting one another. And if that is true, then perhaps a new question naturally emerges. If we are connected this deeply, can the emotions of one person spread to another? Can joy be transmitted? Can fear be contagious? Can the peace within one soul become a refuge for another? Or, to put it more simply, why is it that sometimes, the moment we walk into a room, we can already sense its atmosphere, even before a single word has been spoken? Perhaps all of us have experienced moments like these. You walk into a tense meeting. No one openly says they are worried, yet you can feel it. The air seems heavier. Eyes shift restlessly. Smiles appear strained. Silences linger a little longer than usual. And within only a few minutes, you begin to feel uneasy as well. On the other hand, there are times when you meet someone whose presence feels remarkably peaceful. Someone who speaks slowly, listens attentively, does not rush, does not judge, does not impose. And somehow, simply sitting beside them begins to calm your own mind. Your breathing slows. The chaos of your thoughts softens. You feel lighter, though you may not know exactly why. What is happening during moments like these? Carl Jung made a fascinating observation. He believed that human beings do not communicate only through words. We also communicate through deeper layers of the psyche, layers that reason alone cannot always see. Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Hidden within that statement is an important truth. Human beings do not exist as sealed and isolated entities. We constantly influence one another, constantly react to one another, constantly shape one another's emotional world. Like the surface of a great lake, when a stone is dropped into one corner, ripples travel outward in every direction. They may be small, they may be subtle, but they never disappear completely. Emotions often work in much the same way. Today, psychology refers to this phenomenon as emotional contagion. The phrase may sound unusual, yet it happens around us every day. When someone laughs sincerely, those nearby become more likely to smile. When one person panics, that panic can quickly spread to others. When someone remains calm during a crisis, they can become an anchor for an entire group. What is fascinating is that most of this process occurs outside conscious awareness. We do not consciously decide to imitate others. It simply happens. The brain observes, the body responds, the nervous system adjusts, and emotions begin to spread. Perhaps that is one reason fear travels so quickly. Throughout human history, this tendency offered an important survival advantage. If one member of a tribe detected danger and became frightened, the ability of others to rapidly sense that fear could save the entire group. From an evolutionary perspective, emotional contagion functions as a highly effective warning system, yet that same mechanism also allows positive emotions to spread. Joy, kindness, compassion, gratitude, hope, all of these can travel from one person to another. And perhaps this is one of the most beautiful truths about human nature. An act of kindness rarely stops with the first person who receives it. Imagine an ordinary morning. Someone holds a door open for another person. The recipient feels slightly better. Their mood improves, even if only a little. They then treat a colleague more kindly. That colleague returns home carrying a more positive emotional state, and later they become more patient with their children. A small chain reaction begins with a very small gesture. No one sees the entire chain, yet it continues unfolding, quietly, silently, day after day, hour after hour, moment after moment. There is a saying often attributed to various thinkers, and regardless of its exact origin, its meaning remains deeply beautiful. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. Perhaps we often underestimate the power of kindness because it rarely creates dramatic changes overnight. Yet when viewed across greater distances and longer stretches of time, kindness resembles ripples spreading across water. A small circle creates a larger one, then a larger one still, until no one remembers where the first stone entered the lake. The same is true of fear. Human history shows us that crowds can become extraordinarily frightening when fear spreads without restraint. A rumor, a scream, a vague sign of danger, and within moments, hundreds of people may begin acting as though they are a single organism, panicking, running, losing the ability to think calmly. Yet what is equally remarkable is that crowds can also move in the opposite direction. During natural disasters, during crises, during humanity's most difficult moments, people often witness astonishing acts of selflessness. Strangers helping strangers, people who have never met sharing food, sharing shelter, sharing comfort. It is almost as if when one person begins acting with compassion, others are given permission to do the same. Jung believed that beneath our individual differences exists a deeper layer connecting us all. Perhaps emotional contagion is one of the clearest expressions of that connection. We influence one another far more than we realize. Your sadness can affect others, but so can your peace. Your anxiety can spread, but your kindness can spread as well. Every emotion is like a flame. It can burn, but it can also provide warmth. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is that each of us contributes to the emotional atmosphere of the world around us, through the way we speak, through the way we listen, through the way we respond to others, through the way we show up. We may not be able to control everything that happens in life, but every day, we send invisible ripples into the world. Ripples of fear or hope, of anger or peace, of judgment or understanding. And perhaps, in this very moment, as you listen to this story in the quiet stillness of the night, the sense of calm arising within your mind is itself a small ripple, a ripple that may continue traveling tomorrow. When you meet another person, when you smile at someone, when you truly listen, when you choose to be just a little kinder, because emotions, much like light, rarely remain where they were first born. Part 4. Empathy does not always appear as tears. As we concluded the previous section, we explored a fascinating truth. that emotions can spread from one person to another, much like ripples moving across the surface of a still lake. Fear can spread, joy can spread, peace can spread, and kindness can spread as well. Yet, when many of us think about empathy, we still carry a familiar image in our minds. The image of someone shedding tears at another person's suffering. The image of someone deeply moved by another person's story. The image of a heart that is easily touched. In popular culture, empathy is often portrayed through tears, through powerful emotions, through visible and unmistakable reactions. And because of this, many people unconsciously come to believe the more emotionally expressive someone is, the more empathetic they must be. The calmer someone appears, the less empathy they possess. But is that really true? Perhaps tonight, as everything becomes a little quieter, we can spend a few moments looking more deeply into that question. Because sometimes, the deepest forms of empathy are also the least noticeable. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Perhaps this is also true of the way we understand empathy. If we focus only on outward expressions, we may assume that empathy is defined by powerful emotional displays. But if we look more deeply, we begin to see that the essence of empathy is not measured by how intensely emotions are expressed. It is measured by how fully present we are for another human being. Imagine two situations. In the first, a friend is sharing their pain. The listener immediately bursts into tears. They become deeply emotional. They speak at length about how heartbreaking the story feels to them. Yet gradually, the conversation shifts toward their own emotions. The person who was originally suffering becomes the one offering comfort. In the second situation, another person sits quietly. They do not cry. They do not speak excessively. They do not try to draw attention to themselves. They simply listen. Occasionally they nod. Occasionally they ask a gentle question. And when needed, they simply say, "I am here. I hear you. I understand how difficult this is." Which of these two people is more empathetic? The answer is not always obvious, but it reveals something important. Empathy does not need to be loud. Empathy does not need to be dramatic. Empathy does not need to prove itself through tears. Sometimes it appears in the form of calmness, sometimes even in silence. This is especially true during life's most painful moments. Think of a physician in an emergency room, a nurse in intensive care, a rescue worker, a father, a mother, a friend caring for someone during a crisis. If they became completely overwhelmed by the suffering before them, they would be unable to help. Their calmness is precisely what is needed, not because they do not care, but because they care deeply. That calmness is not distance. It is a form of love, a form of presence, a form of mature empathy. Carl Jung once observed, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." People who understand their own emotions deeply rarely feel the need to prove them. They do not need to perform compassion. They do not need others to see how affected they are, because they have learned how to stay with emotion, stay with pain, stay with uncertainty, without being swept away by it. Perhaps this is one of the greatest differences between empathy and emotional fusion. Empathy means entering another person's world while keeping your own feet firmly planted on the ground. Otherwise, we sink alongside them, and when both people are sinking, no one is left able to help. Today, psychologists sometimes distinguish between empathy and empathic distress. Empathy is the capacity to understand and connect. Empathic distress is suffering because of empathy. When we witness another person's pain, we can become so overwhelmed that we feel compelled to withdraw, not because we do not care, but because our nervous system cannot tolerate the intensity of the emotion. Healthy empathy, however, allows us to stay, to listen, to understand, to support, without being drowned by the experience. This also helps explain why some people express empathy through actions rather than emotions. They do not speak much. They do not cry. They do not display their feelings dramatically, but they show up when needed. They help when needed. They remember what matters. They make a phone call. They bring a meal. They drive someone to the hospital. They sit beside a grieving person without saying a word. In many cases, this is empathy in its purest form, because emotions only become meaningful when they lead to presence. A person may speak endlessly about compassion, but truly empathetic people are often the ones who quietly stay. Carl Rogers, the renowned psychologist, once said, "When someone really hears you, without passing judgment on you, without trying to take responsibility for you, without trying to mold you, it feels damn good." What is striking is that Rogers was not talking about tears. He was not talking about emotional displays. He was not talking about dramatic reactions. He was talking about being heard, being seen, being accepted. That is the heart of empathy. Perhaps all of us have experienced this. Some people say very little, yet make us feel understood. Some people do very little, yet make us feel safe. Some people simply remain present, and that presence becomes a refuge for the soul. Jung believed that every human being carries hidden depths that even they may not fully understand. And sometimes, what we need most is not someone to solve our problems, but someone patient enough to walk beside us into those darker places, not to shine a flashlight for us, not to pull us out, simply to be there. And perhaps that is one of the most beautiful forms of empathy. Not tears, not advice, not solutions, but presence, attention, and the ability to help another person feel that they do not have to face their pain alone. When we understand this, we begin to see ourselves differently as well. Perhaps you are not someone who cries easily. Perhaps you do not openly express your emotions. Perhaps you are not naturally gifted at speaking moving words. That does not mean you lack empathy. If you know how to listen, if you know how to care, if you know how to be present, if you know how to offer your sincere attention to another human being, then you may be practicing empathy in a deeper way than you realize. And perhaps, as tonight gradually settles into greater stillness, we can carry with us a gentle realization that empathy is not a performance of emotion. It is the art of presence, the ability to offer another person a safe space in which they can simply be themselves. It is attention without judgment, listening without hurry, and sometimes silence filled with love. Yet this brings us to another question. If empathy is not entirely an inborn emotion, if it does not depend solely upon personality or natural sensitivity, can human beings learn to become more empathetic? Is empathy a skill that can be cultivated? Or do we possess only the amount we were given at birth? That is the journey we will explore together in the next section. Part 5. Empathy changes the way we see the world. As we concluded the previous section, we arrived at a rather surprising realization. Empathy does not necessarily reveal itself through tears. Not everyone who remains quiet is indifferent. Not everyone who becomes highly emotional understands more deeply. Sometimes, the most genuine empathy appears in the form of quiet presence. A person sitting beside us, a patient gaze, a gentle question, a silence safe enough for another person to simply be themselves. And from there, a new question begins to emerge. If empathy is truly the act of paying attention to another person's inner world, what happens to the way we see the world when that capacity grows? Does empathy merely help us understand other people better, or does it also transform the very eyes through which we observe life? Perhaps the answer lies within a simple truth. We do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Two people can walk into the same room, hear the same story, look at the same face, and yet come away with entirely different understandings. Because what shapes experience is not only what is happening outside of us, it is also what is happening within us. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Hidden within those words is a profound realization. Much of what we see in other people is filtered through our own inner world. When we are afraid, we tend to see threats. When we are wounded, we tend to see rejection. When we are angry, we tend to see faults. And when empathy develops, we begin noticing things we once overlooked. Perhaps all of us have experienced this. A coworker walks past without saying hello. Without empathy, we might think, how arrogant. They are deliberately ignoring me. They don't respect me. But when empathy enters the picture, another door opens. Perhaps they are carrying sadness. Perhaps they have just received difficult news. Perhaps they are worried about their family. Perhaps they did not even notice they had walked past. The event itself has not changed. The other person has not changed. Yet the world in our eyes has changed. Empathy does not merely add information. It expands our range of interpretation. It makes us less hurried, less judgmental, less certain that we are always right. And that changes nearly every relationship in our lives. Modern neuroscience suggests that when we genuinely care about someone, the brain begins paying closer attention to subtle social signals. We notice facial expressions more carefully. We notice eyes more carefully. We notice tone of voice more carefully. We notice small emotional shifts more carefully. And this happens naturally. Think of someone you love, perhaps your child, your partner, a close friend. You often recognize their mood before they say a single word, a smile that feels slightly forced, a gaze that seems a little distant, a quiet sigh, a pause that lasts longer than usual. Details that others might miss become obvious to you, not because you possess special senses, but because care has trained your brain to pay attention. In a sense, empathy changes the filters through which we perceive reality. It adjusts the focus of the lens through which we view the world. Without empathy, we mainly see behavior. With empathy, we begin seeing the story behind the behavior, and that is an enormous difference. A child having a tantrum, a rebellious teenager, an irritable employee, an unpleasant stranger. If we focus only on behavior, we are quick to judge. If we look for the story behind it, we become curious. And curiosity is always a companion of empathy. Throughout much of his work, Jung emphasized that the most dangerous things are not what we do not know. Rather, they are the things we believe we already understand completely. Because once we believe we understand, we stop observing, we stop listening, we stop learning, we stop opening ourselves. Empathy does the opposite. It slows us down. It reminds us that behind every human being exists an inner world far larger than we can immediately see. There is a small story often mentioned in studies of social perception. Two people see the same man sitting alone in a park. The first person thinks he looks lonely. The second person thinks he is enjoying the peace and quiet. The truth is that neither of them actually knows, yet the brain constantly fills gaps with assumptions. Empathy helps us recognize that tendency. It makes us trust our own stories a little less and become more curious about reality. Perhaps this is one of empathy's greatest gifts. Not that it makes us weaker, not that it makes us more vulnerable, but that it helps us see the world more accurately. Because most misunderstandings in life do not arise from malice. They arise because we reach conclusions too quickly, assign motives too quickly, assume too quickly that we know what others are thinking, when, in reality, we are often seeing only reflections of ourselves. Jung called this phenomenon projection. We unconsciously place our fears onto others, our expectations onto others, our personal stories onto others, and then we react to things that exist primarily within our own minds. Empathy helps break that cycle. It shifts us from, "I know exactly what kind of person you are," to, "I wonder what might be happening inside you." That single shift can rescue countless relationships. It transforms judgment into curiosity, distance into connection, conflict into dialogue. Perhaps that is why deeply empathetic people are often not the ones who speak the most. They are the ones who observe most carefully, listen the longest, and reach conclusions the slowest. They understand that human emotions are rarely simple. A person may smile while suffering. A person may remain silent while still loving deeply. A person may become angry when what they truly feel is fear. A person may appear cold when what they truly carry is pain. The emotional world is always more complex than it appears, and empathy is the key that allows us to see those deeper layers. Perhaps that is why, when empathy grows, the entire world seems to change. Faces become more alive, stories become richer, people become more mysterious and fascinating. We begin to realize that we are living among millions of different inner worlds, each person carrying their own dreams, their own wounds, their own memories, their own fears, their own hopes. And once we recognize that, compassion begins to arise naturally, not because we are trying to become kinder, but because we are seeing more, understanding more, and feeling more. Yet what is fascinating is that empathy is not expressed only through what we see. It also appears in the way we communicate, in the tone of our voice, in our eyes, in the silence between words, in the way human bodies converse with one another even when no words are spoken. And that is the journey we will continue exploring in the next section, Part 6, Voice, Eye Contact, and Body Language. As we concluded the previous section, we realized that empathy does not merely change how we feel about other people. It changes how we see the world itself. An empathetic person does not simply notice actions. They begin noticing the stories behind those actions. They do not merely see faces. They sense the emotions behind those faces. They do not simply hear words. They listen for what has not yet been spoken. And that leads us to a fascinating question. If empathy allows us to understand others more deeply, how does that happen? How do we sense sadness in someone's eyes, recognize anxiety in a voice, or know that someone is hurting even while they are smiling? Perhaps the answer lies in a simple truth. Human beings have never communicated through words alone. Before writing existed, before books existed, before speeches existed, before complex conversations existed, human beings communicated through eye contact, through facial expressions, through posture, through breathing, through the sounds carried within the voice. And in many ways, we are still doing exactly that every day. Even now, Carl Jung once wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Perhaps this is equally true of human communication. Sometimes a glance lasting only a few seconds can communicate more emotion than an entire speech. A gentle nod can offer more comfort than hundreds of pieces of advice. A silence filled with understanding can heal more deeply than lengthy explanations. Because much of what creates empathy does not live in words. It lives in the way we show up. Researchers in communication have long understood that when human beings speak with one another, we are not merely listening to content. At the same time, we are reading dozens of other signals: volume, rhythm, speaking speed, facial expressions, eye contact, posture, physical distance. Most of these factors operate beneath conscious awareness, yet they exert a powerful influence on whether we feel understood. Think about the last time you spoke with someone who genuinely made you feel safe. Perhaps they did not say anything extraordinary. Perhaps they did not provide a perfect solution, yet there was something about the way they listened, something difficult to describe. Perhaps it was patience. Perhaps it was their voice. Perhaps it was their eyes. Perhaps it was simply the feeling that they were not in a hurry, and somehow you felt seen, accepted, understood. This brings us to the first element of empathy, the voice. The human voice is one of the most powerful emotional tools we possess. Infants recognize their mother's voice very early in life, long before they understand any words. They respond to rhythm, tone, gentleness, not to content, but to the emotion carried within the content. And in truth, adults are not very different. We often believe we are persuaded by logic, yet in many situations, the first thing we respond to is the voice itself. A simple sentence such as, "I understand you," can bring healing or create further hurt, depending entirely on how it is spoken. A voice that is slow, warm, calm, signals safety to another person's nervous system, while a voice that is rushed, cold, or tense may cause them to withdraw, even when the words themselves are identical. This helps explain why, during life's most difficult moments, we often remember how someone made us feel more than the exact words they spoke. Next comes eye contact, perhaps the oldest language of empathy. Thousands of years ago, long before humanity developed complex language systems, the eyes were already carrying emotional messages. Today, science shows that human beings possess an extraordinary ability to recognize emotions through the eyes. We recognize sadness, anxiety, joy, confusion, sincerity, sometimes within only a brief moment. Yet empathy does not require staring intensely at another person. Empathy lives in the presence behind the gaze, a look that quietly says, "I am here, I am listening, I care." Some people make us feel invisible. They constantly check their phones, constantly interrupt, constantly allow their minds to wander elsewhere. And there are others who make us feel as though we are the only person in the room, not because they talk more, but because they pay attention. Jung believed that one of humanity's deepest desires is to be seen for who we truly are, not for our roles, not for our titles, not for our social masks, but for the real person beneath them. And sometimes, eye contact becomes the first doorway to that experience. Yet perhaps the most underestimated element of communication is silence. In the modern world, we often fear silence. We rush to fill every empty space with words, with advice, with explanations, with solutions. But empathy often appears within pauses. Someone has just shared the most painful story of their life, and instead of immediately offering advice, you remain silent for a few moments. That silence says, "I am truly listening. I am staying with this feeling alongside you. I do not need to rush in and fix it." Carl Rogers once wrote, "When someone really hears you without passing judgment on you, without trying to take responsibility for you, without trying to mold you, it feels damn good." That is the power of silence. It allows emotions room to exist, room to be seen, room to be understood. And finally, there is body language. There is a fascinating phenomenon in psychology. When two people genuinely connect, their bodies begin synchronizing. They sit in similar ways, lean in similar directions, breathe in similar rhythms. This often happens entirely unconsciously, as though the body is quietly saying, "I understand you, I am with you." Conversely, a tense body often communicates tension. A relaxed body communicates safety. And because the human nervous system is constantly reading these signals, feelings of empathy are often transmitted before words even appear. Perhaps this is the most beautiful insight we can carry forward from this section. Empathy does not depend upon perfect words. It does not depend upon complicated communication techniques. It does not depend upon always knowing exactly what to say. It depends upon how we are present, how we look, how we listen, how we share space with another human being. Because sometimes, what makes a person feel loved is not grand speeches. It is the feeling that someone is truly here, truly paying attention, truly caring. And once we understand that, we begin to realize that empathy is not some mysterious gift reserved for a fortunate few. It is a skill, an art, a capacity that can be nurtured day by day. And that leads us naturally to the next question. If empathy is built from attention, listening, and presence, can human beings learn to become more empathetic? Or is it simply an inborn trait? That is the journey we will explore together in the next section. Part 7. Empathy can be cultivated. As we concluded the previous section, we explored something rather beautiful. That empathy does not live only within words. It reveals itself through the eyes, through the voice, through moments of attentive silence, through the way one human being truly shows up for another. And once we understand that, a natural question arises. If empathy is built from the ways we see, listen, and remain present, can it be learned? Or is empathy a special gift that some people are simply born with, while others are not? This is a remarkably common belief, that some people are naturally empathetic, more sensitive, more perceptive, more capable of understanding others, while some seem colder, more distant, less able to connect, less able to read emotions. Yet when we look more deeply into both modern psychology and Carl Jung's observations about the development of the human soul, a different picture begins to emerge, a more hopeful picture, because empathy is not merely an instinct, it is also a skill, and like every skill, it can be nurtured. It can be practiced. It can grow over time. Carl Jung once wrote, "One looks back with appreciation to the brilliant teachers, but with gratitude to those who touched our human feelings." What is interesting is that Jung was not speaking about the smartest people. He was speaking about those who could touch the inner world of another human being, a capacity that comes not from knowing more, but from understanding more deeply. And that deeper understanding is rarely something entirely inborn. More often, it is built through experience, through practice, through thousands of small moments scattered throughout life. Perhaps we should begin with a simple observation. No one is born understanding other people. Even children learn this gradually. At first, a child's world revolves around themselves, their needs, their emotions, their fears, their joys. Only with time do they begin to recognize that other people also have feelings, their own desires, their own experiences. This is the first foundation of empathy, realizing that other people possess inner worlds as rich and complex as our own. It sounds obvious, yet in practice, it is remarkably difficult, because the human brain naturally places itself at the center of experience. We understand the world through our own perspective, judge events through our own experiences, interpret others through what we already know, and sometimes that very tendency creates distance. One of the most important skills of empathy is learning to step out of our own chair and for a moment sit in someone else's, not in order to agree with them, not in order to abandon our own perspective, but simply to understand. Jung spent much of his life studying the unconscious dimensions of the human mind. He realized that each person lives within a unique psychological world. The same event may carry entirely different meanings for different people. A comment that seems harmless may touch an old wound. A small action may awaken memories from many years ago. Without attempting to see through another person's eyes, it becomes very easy to misunderstand them. That is why the first skill of empathy is perspective taking, not through imagination alone, but through genuine curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why would they behave like that?" we begin asking, "What might have happened that led them to behave that way?" The difference between those two questions is profound. The first often leads to judgment. The second leads to understanding. Another important skill is what psychologists call reflective listening. The term may sound complicated, yet the idea is remarkably simple. It is the ability to reflect back what another person has shared in order to make sure we have truly understood. Instead of immediately offering advice, we might say, "It sounds like that left you feeling deeply disappointed. I hear that you've been feeling lonely. That must be incredibly difficult for you." These statements do not solve the problem, but they create something even more important. They create the feeling of being understood. Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists in the study of empathy, once wrote, "The great majority of us cannot listen. We find ourselves compelled to evaluate." Perhaps this is one of empathy's greatest obstacles. We listen in order to respond. We listen in order to argue. We listen in order to fix. We listen in order to offer solutions. But very rarely do we listen simply to understand. Yet empathy begins with understanding, not fixing, not controlling, not changing, simply understanding. Another path toward developing empathy is exposure to different stories, reading books, listening to lives unlike our own, exploring different cultures, meeting people whose experiences differ from ours. This is especially important in the modern world, because human beings naturally gravitate toward familiar circles. We befriend people like ourselves, follow people like ourselves, read opinions that resemble our own, and gradually, we forget how much larger the world truly is. Every great novel is an opportunity to live another life. Every sincere story is an opportunity to step into another person's world. Jung believed that the development of the soul is always connected to the expansion of consciousness, expanding what we are able to see, expanding what we are able to understand, expanding what we are able to accept, and encountering different stories may be one of the most powerful ways to do exactly that. Yet perhaps the most important skill of all is learning to ask questions before making judgments. It sounds simple, but it is extraordinarily difficult, because the brain loves quick conclusions. They save energy, save time, create a feeling of certainty. Yet certainty arrived at too quickly is often the enemy of empathy. Empathetic people do not rush to conclusions. They remain curious. They ask questions. They explore. They accept the possibility that they may not yet understand the whole picture. There is a saying often repeated in psychology and leadership: seek first to understand, then to be understood. Though the phrase is most famously associated with Stephen Covey, it reflects the spirit of empathy beautifully, because when we genuinely seek to understand others, we begin seeing the world differently, with less judgment, with less certainty, but with greater compassion. And perhaps that is the most valuable lesson we can carry from this section. Empathy is not a mystical quality, not a privilege reserved for a chosen few, not a gift randomly distributed at birth. It is more like a garden. If cared for, it grows. If nourished, it blossoms. If practiced every day, it gradually changes the way we see others and the way we see ourselves. Because in the end, empathy is not a talent. It is a choice repeated many times, a skill strengthened through practice, a path that anyone can walk. And what is fascinating is that this journey begins very early in life, even before we learn to speak, before we understand complex ideas about psychology or morality. For the first seeds of empathy appear when we are still very small children, and that is the story we will explore in the next section. Part 8. Empathy begins in infancy. As we concluded the previous section, we explored a deeply hopeful idea, that empathy is not a mysterious gift reserved for a fortunate few. It is not a fixed talent bestowed upon us at birth. Rather, it is a living capacity, a seed, a potential waiting to be nurtured, to grow, to mature over time. And naturally, another question emerges. If empathy can be cultivated, where does it begin? When do human beings first begin caring about the emotions of others? Must we wait until adulthood? Until we learn morality? Until we understand concepts such as kindness, compassion, and love? Or do the earliest roots of empathy appear much sooner? Perhaps the answer will surprise us, because traces of empathy emerge almost from the very beginning of life, before language, before clear memories, before a fully formed sense of self, in the quiet rooms of maternity wards, in a newborn's first cries, in the embrace of a mother, something has already begun. Carl Jung once wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order." If we look at the earliest years of human life, we may see such an order unfolding, a quiet yet extraordinary developmental process, a capacity for connection planted within the human soul from the very beginning. Researchers studying child development have discovered a fascinating phenomenon. When a newborn hears another infant crying, they often begin crying as well. At first glance, this may seem like a simple reaction. Yet if we look more closely, it reveals something profound. The infant does not know who is crying, does not understand the story. does not understand the pain, and yet their nervous system responds, as though another person's emotion has somehow touched their own. Many scientists view this as one of the earliest forms of empathy, a primitive form of emotional resonance, evidence that human beings are not born as isolated islands, but as creatures capable of sensing one another. Perhaps this is one of the most beautiful images of human nature, that before we learn to compete, we already know how to connect. Before we learn to judge, we already respond to the emotions of others. Before we fully distinguish between me and you, some part of us already senses a bond. Jung often spoke about what he called the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of the psyche where humanity's most fundamental experiences are shared. Modern science may interpret that idea in different ways, yet its central message remains beautiful, that we are connected far more deeply than appearances suggest. And perhaps newborns are among the clearest reminders of that truth, because they have not yet learned to hide, have not yet learned to wear masks, have not yet learned to separate themselves from the emotions of others. Their responses are direct, natural, authentic. But something even more touching begins to happen a few years later. As children grow, many parents describe remarkable moments. A toddler notices that their mother is sad. The child does not understand the reason, does not understand stress, does not understand the burdens of adult life. Yet they walk over, place a hand on their mother's shoulder, give her a hug, or bring her their favorite toy, as though saying, "I want to help." It is a simple image, yet it contains something extraordinary. The child has begun to recognize that another person has feelings of their own, and beyond that, they want to do something about those feelings. This marks an important step in the development of empathy, not merely feeling, but caring, not merely reacting, but wanting to connect. In many cultures, people often say that children learn through observation. That is certainly true. Yet perhaps we do not fully appreciate how profound this really is. Children do not only learn how to speak, how to walk, how to eat. They also learn how to love, how to listen, how to empathize. And most of those lessons do not come from lectures. They come from experience. A child who is listened to learns how to listen. A child who is comforted learns how to comfort. A child who is understood learns how to understand. Carl Jung once wrote, "Children are educated by what the grown-up is, and not by his talk." Perhaps this is one of the deepest insights ever offered about the development of empathy. Because children do not learn empathy through moral lectures. They learn it through the way adults treat them, through the emotional atmosphere of the home, through the conversations they overhear, through the ways adults respond to one another's pain. If a child grows up in an environment where emotions are acknowledged and heard, empathy often develops more naturally. If a child is regularly asked, "How are you feeling? Did that make you sad? How do you think your friend feels?" they gradually learn the language of emotions. They gradually learn how to see the world through another person's eyes. Conversely, when emotions are consistently ignored, mocked, or dismissed, the development of empathy may become more difficult. This does not mean everything is determined in childhood. As we explored earlier, empathy can still be learned throughout every stage of life. Yet the early years are like the first soil into which the seed is planted. Rich soil allows the seed to grow more easily. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that the process never truly ends. Every encounter, every relationship, every experience can expand our capacity for empathy a little further. Perhaps that is what makes empathy so remarkable. It is not a fixed quality. It is a journey, an ongoing process of growth, a continuing dialogue between ourselves and the world. And when we look back at newborns responding to one another's cries, at young children trying to comfort their parents, at caring eyes appearing so early in life, we begin to realize something gentle and profound. Perhaps empathy is not something we must create from nothing. Perhaps it has always been there, like a sleeping seed, waiting to be nourished, waiting to awaken, waiting for the opportunity to grow. Yet this brings us to another question. If empathy is influenced by both biology and environment, what truly creates the differences between one person and another? Why do some people seem naturally empathetic, while others struggle more? What role do personality, culture, beliefs, and the stories we hear as children play in shaping this capacity? That is the journey we will explore next. Part 9: Biology and the stories that shape empathy. As we concluded the previous section, we reflected together on a remarkably gentle truth, that the first seeds of empathy seem to appear very early in human life. In the cry of one infant responding to the cry of another, in a tiny hand reaching out to comfort a saddened mother. In those moments when the human heart seems to know how to connect, long before it learns how to speak. Yet this brings us to a deeper question. If empathy is a seed already planted within the soul, why does each person's capacity for empathy differ so greatly? Why do some people seem to sense another person's pain almost instantly, while others find it more difficult to understand emotions? Why are some communities known for their hospitality and care for one another, while in other places, suspicion and distance seem to arise more easily? Perhaps the answer lies at the curious intersection of two worlds. One is biology, the other is story. One is the nervous system we are born with, the other is everything we learn throughout our lives. And it is precisely where these two streams meet that empathy begins to take on its unique shape within each individual. Carl Jung once wrote, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." This may be one of the most important statements for understanding empathy, because many people believe they are seeing others, but in reality, they are often seeing the stories that already exist within themselves. When we meet a stranger, the brain does not simply receive information. It interprets, it compares, it connects with old memories, it searches through previous experiences, and then it creates a picture of the person before us. What is fascinating is that two different people can look at the same individual and come away with completely different impressions, not because the other person has changed, but because the stories within them are different. To understand this, we must first return to biology. Not everyone possesses the same nervous system. Some people are born with a higher degree of sensitivity. They notice subtle changes in tone of voice, catch fleeting expressions on a face, sense the emotional atmosphere of a room almost immediately. Today, researchers refer to part of this phenomenon as sensory processing sensitivity. People with this trait often find empathy easier, not because they are better than others, but because their nervous systems absorb more signals, yet at the same time, they are also more vulnerable to overwhelm, more vulnerable to exhaustion, more affected by negative emotions. This reminds us that empathy is not merely a gift, it is also a responsibility, a capacity that requires balance. Jung devoted much of his life to studying differences in personality. He observed that human beings do not approach the world in the same way. Some are introverted, some are extroverted, some are guided primarily by feeling, others by thinking. And these differences influence how empathy is expressed. A feeling-oriented person may easily sense another person's sadness, while a thinking-oriented person may not display strong emotions, yet may try to help through practical solutions. Both can be expressions of empathy. They simply take different forms. This is important, because sometimes we misunderstand others. We assume that someone who does not cry does not care, that someone who shows little emotion is cold. Yet reality is often far more complex. Some people love deeply but express it through actions. Some are not skilled at offering comforting words but always appear when needed. Some struggle to express emotions but quietly sacrifice much of their lives for others. Empathy speaks many more languages than we realize, yet biology tells only half the story. The other half lies in the stories we hear from childhood onward. Because human beings do not live by DNA alone. We live by meaning, by belief, by the stories that help us understand the world. A child who grows up repeatedly hearing, "Strangers are dangerous," may develop a more cautious view of others. A child raised on stories of kindness, cooperation, and mutual support may develop a very different outlook. This does not mean a single story determines someone's destiny, but thousands of small stories repeated over time possess extraordinary power. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The stories we absorb from family, culture, and society often become part of the unconscious mind. They shape how we perceive others without our awareness. If we are taught that a certain group of people is trustworthy, the brain tends to respond accordingly. If we are taught they are dangerous, the brain responds differently. Empathy, therefore, is not merely an emotion. It is also the result of beliefs, patterns, invisible stories carried within the mind. This becomes especially clear in today's media-driven world. Every day we encounter hundreds of stories, through newspapers, through films, through social media, through public debates, and all of these quietly shape our capacity for empathy. When a group of people is repeatedly portrayed as a threat, empathy toward them often decreases. When their story is told with humanity and compassion, empathy tends to increase. Reality itself may not always change, but the way reality is narrated can change dramatically. That is why literature possesses such unique power. A great novel allows us to step into another person's mind. An authentic film allows us to experience life from a perspective we have never lived ourselves. A story told with sincerity can expand the circle of empathy more effectively than hundreds of arguments. Jung believed that stories do more than entertain. They are bridges between souls. They help us recognize that beneath differences of language, nationality, belief, or circumstance, human beings share remarkably similar longings: to be loved, to be accepted, to feel safe, to belong. Perhaps this is the most beautiful gift empathy can offer. It allows us to see through appearances, beyond prejudice, beyond the labels society places upon one another, to recognize the human being behind the story. And once we understand that, we begin to see that empathy is not merely a biological response, not merely a social skill, not merely a moral virtue. It is a way of choosing to see the world, a way of choosing to see others, a way of choosing to tell stories about one another. Because ultimately, the stories we believe become the people we become, and the stories we tell about others determine how deeply we can empathize with them. But if empathy is shaped by both biology and story, another question naturally emerges. What happens when empathy grows strong enough? Does it only change the way we see other people, or does it also influence our own lives? Do people who connect more deeply with others actually live healthier and happier lives? That is the journey we will explore next. Part D. Empathy helps human beings live healthier and longer. As we concluded the previous section, we arrived at a rather fascinating realization: that empathy does not emerge in a vacuum. It is shaped by biology, nurtured by family, formed by culture, guided by the stories we hear and believe throughout our lives. Each human being is like a book being written day by day, and the way we perceive others depends greatly upon the chapters already written within ourselves. Yet another question soon arises. If empathy is truly this important, if it helps us understand one another more deeply, if it makes the world more humane, then is it merely a beautiful moral quality, or does it offer something even deeper? Does empathy influence health? Does it influence longevity? Does it affect the way the body functions? Or are these simply emotions too difficult to measure? Remarkably, modern science increasingly points toward a very clear answer. Empathy does not merely change the soul, it changes the body as well. It influences not only emotions, but health itself. It helps people live happier lives, and in many cases, it may even help them live longer lives. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." Perhaps this touches one of humanity's deepest needs, not merely to exist, but to be understood, not merely to be seen, but to be seen as we truly are. For there is a quiet form of suffering, the feeling of carrying heavy thoughts and emotions alone, unknown, unseen, unheard. And what is fascinating is that our bodies respond to this state far more strongly than many people realize. Research on stress suggests that when human beings feel isolated, the nervous system often remains in a heightened state of alertness. Cortisol levels rise. Heart rhythms become more vulnerable to disruption. Sleep quality declines. The immune system functions less effectively. The body seems to prepare itself for a prolonged threat. Yet, paradoxically, that threat is not always a predator, not a war, not a natural disaster. Sometimes it is simply loneliness, the feeling of not belonging, the feeling of disconnection. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. For most of human history, separation from the community represented a serious survival risk. Our ancestors lived in groups, hunted in groups, protected one another in groups, raised children in groups. The human brain evolved within that context, and therefore, social connection is not a luxury. It is a biological necessity, almost as essential as food and shelter. That is why supportive relationships have such a powerful impact on health. Not because they solve every problem, but because they reduce the feeling of facing every problem alone. Imagine two people experiencing the same hardship. Both lose their jobs, both become ill, both face enormous pressure. One has friends willing to listen, family members nearby, someone who regularly asks, "Are you okay?" The other faces it entirely alone. Though their external circumstances are similar, their internal experiences are profoundly different. Pain that is shared often becomes lighter, not because it disappears, but because it no longer has to be carried alone. That is why researchers frequently describe social connection as one of the strongest protective factors for health ever identified. In many long-term studies spanning decades, the quality of relationships often predicts future health more reliably than many factors we typically consider important. Because the body does not respond only to food or exercise, it also responds to feeling loved, supported, and connected. Carl Rogers once wrote, "When a person realizes he has been deeply heard, his eyes moisten. That is not weakness, it is release." Because being understood is a healing experience, one capable of calming the nervous system, reducing stress, and restoring a sense of safety. And that is where our journey continues. Part 11. Empathy does not mean agreement. As we concluded the previous section, we explored something truly beautiful. That empathy does not merely warm the heart. It also affects our health, our nervous system, our ability to recover, our sense of belonging in this world. We discovered that a person who feels heard often feels lighter. A person who feels understood often becomes stronger. And sometimes, a single, sincere relationship can become a source of strength that helps someone survive the most difficult seasons of life. But it is precisely here that a very common misunderstanding begins to appear. Many people hear about empathy and become uneasy. They believe that if they empathize with someone, they must agree with them. If they try to understand someone, they must accept everything that person does. If they see the world through another person's eyes, they will somehow lose their own perspective. And so they build walls, not because they lack kindness, but because they fear losing themselves. This is a deeply human fear, and it is why we must pause for a moment in our journey to explore an important distinction. Empathy is not the same as agreement. Understanding someone does not mean approving of everything they do. Listening does not mean abandoning your values, and recognizing another person's pain does not mean ignoring the consequences of their actions. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." At first glance, this may seem like a strange statement, but if we reflect on it more deeply, we find something profound. Jung was not saying that we must like everyone. He was not saying that we must agree with every action. He was saying that even our strongest reactions toward other people can become opportunities to understand human nature more deeply. And that is the heart of empathy. Empathy does not ask us to surrender our ability to distinguish right from wrong. It simply asks us to temporarily set judgment aside long enough to understand what lies beneath. Imagine someone who is angry. They say hurtful things. They behave recklessly. From the surface, all we see is anger. But if we look deeper, perhaps beneath that anger is fear, a sense of helplessness, a hidden wound, an old hurt that has never fully healed. Empathy does not mean saying, "You are right to behave this way." Empathy simply says, "I understand that you are hurting." Those are two very different things. One evaluates behavior, the other recognizes emotion. And sometimes that difference determines whether a conversation can continue at all. In life, most conflicts do not become painful because people disagree. They become painful because people feel misunderstood. Someone may accept that you disagree with them, but it is far harder to accept the feeling that you have no desire to understand them at all. Carl Rogers once wrote, "When someone really hears you without passing judgment on you, without trying to take responsibility for you, without trying to mold you, it feels damn good." Notice that Rogers was not speaking about agreement. He was speaking about listening. Because what human beings often long for most during difficult conversations is not victory. It is being seen, being understood, having their emotions recognized as real, even when others do not share the same viewpoint. This is why empathy makes difficult conversations safer. When people feel understood, their nervous systems become less defensive. They fight less. They prove less. They protect themselves less. And only in that state can genuine dialogue begin. Yet there is another aspect that is equally important. Healthy empathy always includes boundaries. For many years, people have assumed that empathetic individuals are those who always sacrifice, always give in, always endure, always place others before themselves. But that is not entirely true. In reality, the most sustainably empathetic people are often those with the clearest boundaries. Without boundaries, empathy easily becomes exhaustion. Jung emphasized the importance of becoming a whole individual. He called this process individuation, a journey in which a person learns to connect with others without losing themselves. This is especially important in empathy. You can understand another person's pain without carrying it as your own. You can listen to someone's anger without being consumed by it. You can love someone and still say no when necessary. You can be compassionate without losing your identity. That is not selfishness, it is maturity. Because empathy is not dissolving yourself into another person. Empathy is building a bridge between two people who remain distinct. Imagine standing on one side of a river. Someone else stands on the opposite bank. Empathy does not require you to jump into the water and be swept away by the current. It simply asks you to build a bridge, so you can see them more clearly, understand them more deeply, connect with them more fully, while still standing firmly on your own ground. Perhaps this is why truly empathetic people are not weak. They are often very strong, because it takes strength to listen to difficult truths, strength to sit beside pain, strength to understand without rushing to judge, and strength to remain grounded in yourself while opening your heart to another. Jung once said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." Perhaps this is the essence of mature empathy, not becoming perfect, not always being right, not always being gentle, but understanding yourself deeply enough that you are no longer afraid of the complexity in others. Because human beings are complex, everyone carries beauty and imperfection, moments worthy of admiration and moments worthy of regret. Everyone carries both light and shadow, and when we understand this, empathy deepens. Not because people are perfect, but because they are human, just like us. And perhaps that is empathy's greatest gift. It does not erase differences. It does not make everyone the same. It does not force us into agreement. It simply helps us recognize the humanity within one another, even in disagreement, even in pain, even when we stand on opposite sides. Yet once we understand that empathy does not mean agreement, another question naturally emerges. If empathy contains so many dimensions, are there different kinds of empathy? Is all empathy the same? Or are there entirely different ways of understanding and connecting with others? That is the journey we will explore next. Part 12. The two types of empathy. As we concluded the previous section, we moved through one of the greatest misunderstandings surrounding empathy. That empathy does not mean agreement. It does not mean surrendering your personal perspective. It does not mean approving every behavior. It simply means trying to see the person behind the behavior, the emotion behind the reaction, the story behind what appears on the surface. And as we begin to understand this, another question arises. If empathy is the ability to understand and connect with another person's emotions, what exactly is happening inside us when we empathize? What happens when we see someone cry and feel our own heart grow heavy? What happens when we have never experienced their circumstances, yet somehow understand their feelings? Are all these experiences the same form of empathy? Or are there different layers hidden within what we call empathy? Modern psychology offers a fascinating answer. Empathy is not a single ability. It is more like a piece of music composed of several instruments, and among them, two components are especially important: emotional empathy and cognitive empathy, two different streams, meeting within the same human heart. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Perhaps no sentence captures empathy more beautifully than this one, because whenever we truly connect with another human being, something within us changes as well. Not always dramatically, not always visibly, but rarely do we leave a meaningful encounter exactly as we were before. And it is here that the two forms of empathy emerge. The first is what psychologists call emotional empathy. This is the ability to feel what another person is feeling. When you see someone suffering, your own heart grows heavy. When you see someone joyful, you smile too. When a friend cries while speaking about a loss, your throat tightens. You do not merely understand, you feel, as if their emotions have created ripples within your own soul. Most of us have experienced this. You watch a film. The main character loses someone they love. You know it is only a story. You know those people are fictional. Yet tears still appear. Why? Because the human brain possesses an extraordinary ability to simulate the experiences of others. We do not simply observe emotion, we partially recreate it within ourselves. That is the foundation of emotional empathy. And at its deepest level, it is what prevents human beings from becoming isolated islands. It allows pain to be shared, joy to be multiplied, and life to become richer in connection. Yet, emotional empathy also carries a challenge. If we feel too much without balance, we can become overwhelmed by the emotions of others. A doctor witnessing suffering every day, a therapist listening to thousands of stories of pain, a caregiver supporting a sick loved one for years. If emotional empathy were all they possessed, exhaustion would come quickly. This is why nature seems to have given us a second capacity: cognitive empathy. If emotional empathy is feeling what another person feels, cognitive empathy is understanding what another person feels. You do not necessarily experience the same emotion, but you can see the logic behind it. You understand why they are sad, why they are afraid, why they reacted the way they did. It is like standing on a hilltop and seeing the entire map of a journey. You are not walking the path yourself, but you understand where the path leads. Jung spent much of his life exploring this capacity. He was never satisfied with surface emotions alone. He searched for deeper causes, unconscious motivations, unhealed wounds, rejected parts of the psyche. When someone behaved negatively, Jung rarely stopped at the behavior itself. He asked, What is happening underneath? What is trying to be expressed? What pain is so intense that it must emerge in this way? That is cognitive empathy at a profound level. Not feeling for someone, but understanding them. And sometimes understanding is even more important than feeling, because it helps us remain clear-headed. It prevents us from being swept away by another person's emotions. It allows us to support others without losing ourselves. Imagine a friend who is furious. With only emotional empathy, you may become caught in their anger. Two people, angry. Two nervous systems activated. A conversation that quickly escalates. But with cognitive empathy, you notice something different. You see that beneath the anger may be fear. Beneath the attack may be hurt. Beneath the shouting may be a cry for help. And because you see that, your response changes. Not weaker, but wiser. This is why researchers believe healthy empathy lives in the balance between both forms. Too much emotional empathy without understanding often leads to burnout. Too much cognitive empathy without feeling can become coldness. Maturity lies in integrating both, a heart that feels and a mind that understands. Carl Jung once wrote, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." Perhaps this is exactly what happens when cognitive empathy is underdeveloped. Judgment comes quickly. Understanding arrives slowly. Conclusions are easy. Curiosity is difficult. But when we combine feeling with curiosity, something remarkable happens. We begin to see others differently, with fewer labels, fewer assumptions, and less certainty that the world is divided into absolute right and wrong, not because we lose the ability to evaluate, but because we realize that every behavior has a story behind it, and every story deserves to be heard before it is judged. Perhaps this is one of empathy's greatest gifts. It helps us step outside the prison of the ego, see the world from multiple perspectives, and recognize that human beings are far more complex than we imagine. Yet interestingly, this journey rarely begins with answers. It begins with questions. Sincere questions. Questions that are not trying to prove a point. Questions that are not trying to win an argument. But questions that seek discovery. Because very often, empathy does not begin with emotion. It begins with curiosity. Curiosity about another person's life. Curiosity about what they have experienced. Curiosity about what we do not yet know. And perhaps that curiosity is the doorway into the inner world of another human being. That is the journey we will explore in the next section. Today's curiosity is the gateway to empathy. As we concluded the previous section, we explored the two important currents that flow through empathy. One current allows us to feel what others feel. The other helps us understand what others are experiencing. Emotional empathy moves the heart. Cognitive empathy expands the mind. And when these two abilities come together, they create some of the deepest human connections imaginable. Yet another question naturally arises. What is the very first doorway to empathy? What comes before understanding? Before emotional resonance? Before sincere conversations? The answer may be simpler than we think. It is curiosity. Not the curiosity of gossip, not the urge to uncover another person's private affairs, but a very special kind of curiosity. A genuine interest in the inner world of another human being. A desire to understand. A longing to explore. A gentle question that quietly appears in the mind. I wonder what they have been through. Perhaps empathy does not begin with an answer. Perhaps it begins with a question. Carl Jung once wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." It seems like a simple observation, yet within it lies an entire philosophy of empathy. Because when we forget that every person carries a unique story, we become vulnerable to judgment. We see behavior, but not circumstances. We see outcomes, but not journeys. We see a moment, but not the lifetime that stands behind that moment. And it is here that curiosity becomes a bridge. It prevents us from reaching conclusions too quickly. It encourages us to pause, to take a slow breath, and to ask ourselves, could there be something I don't know? Human beings have a very natural tendency. We fill empty spaces with assumptions. If someone is quiet, we may assume they are cold. If someone avoids conversation, we may assume they are arrogant. If someone reacts strongly, we may assume they are unreasonable. The brain loves quick conclusions. They save energy. They create certainty. They make the world feel easier to understand. Yet Jung repeatedly reminded us that what seems obvious is often only the surface. Beneath it are deeper forces, invisible fears, unnamed wounds, memories that even the person themselves may not fully recognize. This is why curious people often empathize more effectively than hurried people. Curiosity opens exploration. Judgment closes it. Imagine meeting someone who always seems irritated, someone who frequently reacts sharply, someone who appears difficult to approach. If you approach them with judgment, the story ends quickly. This person is unpleasant, but if you approach them with curiosity, another door opens. What happened that made them this way? Perhaps behind the irritability is chronic exhaustion, perhaps a painful divorce, perhaps a childhood marked by wounds, perhaps a sorrow they have never shared with anyone. The difference is simple. One approach closes a door, the other opens one. Psychologist Carl Rogers once said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." This is not only true of ourselves, it is also true of how we view others. When people feel they are being met with curiosity rather than judgment, they often become more open, more relaxed, more authentic. And within that space, connection begins to emerge. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself. A conversation where the other person did not rush to give advice, did not rush to judge, did not rush to fix anything. They simply asked sincere questions. How did that affect you? How did that make you feel? What has been weighing on your mind the most? Questions like these are small lamps shining into hidden corners of the soul. They do not impose. They do not force. They simply create space for truth to appear. Jung believed that much of human life is guided by forces outside conscious awareness. He called this the unconscious. And one of the most beautiful ways to approach the unconscious is through curiosity. Not curiosity that seeks control, but curiosity that seeks discovery, understanding, learning. In truth, children are masters of this. Watch a small child. They ask about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why can birds fly? Why is that person crying? Why is this person smiling? For children, the world is an adventure made of questions. They are not yet trapped by rigid conclusions. They are not quick to label. They are not entirely convinced that they already understand everything. And perhaps this is why children are often more empathetic than we realize. Because curiosity and empathy are close companions. The more curious someone is about the lives of others, the more opportunities they have to understand. The more certain someone becomes that they already know everything, the harder it becomes to see something new. What is fascinating is that curiosity does not only help us understand others, it also helps us understand ourselves. Jung spent his entire life asking questions, not only about his patients, not only about society, but about his own soul. He believed psychological growth begins when a person becomes curious enough to explore themselves, to look into the shadows, the rejected parts, the suppressed emotions, the unacknowledged longings. And strangely enough, the more we understand ourselves, the easier it becomes to understand others. Because very often, the things we judge in others are the things we have not yet reconciled within ourselves. That is why Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When we view life through curiosity, conflicts become lessons. Differences become opportunities for learning. Difficult people become stories that have not yet been fully told. And suddenly, the world becomes larger, deeper, more human. Perhaps empathy is not the ability to see directly into another person's mind. Perhaps it is something simpler. The ability to keep a question alive longer than an answer. The willingness to admit, perhaps I don't fully understand. Perhaps I have missed something. I would like to know more. In a world filled with strong opinions, quick conclusions, and endless debates designed to produce winners and losers, curiosity becomes an act of courage, because it requires humility, patience, and openness. And precisely because of that, it becomes a doorway to empathy. It is difficult to empathize with something we are unwilling to explore, and it is difficult to explore when we have already decided that we know everything. Perhaps that is why the most empathetic people are rarely those with the most answers. They are the people with the most questions, the people who remain fascinated by human beings, who remain curious about life, who remain willing to listen to stories different from their own. And once we step through the doorway of curiosity, we arrive at another discovery, that sometimes what people need most is not advice, not solutions, not correction, but simply someone who is truly present, someone who genuinely listens. That is the journey we will explore in the next section, Page 14. Listening is more important than fixing. As we concluded the previous section, we stepped through a very special doorway, the doorway of curiosity. We discovered that empathy rarely begins with an answer. It begins with a question humble enough to admit that we do not yet understand everything, a question sincere enough to want to explore another person's inner world. And it is this curiosity that helps us slow down before judging. It helps us see the person rather than merely the behavior, the story rather than merely the outcome. Yet once curiosity has opened the door, another question emerges. After we genuinely want to understand someone, what is the greatest gift we can offer them? Advice? Solutions? Guidance? Or something even simpler? Perhaps most of us have experienced a moment like this, a day when our hearts felt heavy with pressure, when some loss had just occurred, when emotions were swirling through the mind. We turned to someone we trusted, not because we wanted them to solve the problem, not because we wanted them to repair our lives, but simply because we needed to speak, to tell our story, to exist in front of another human being without hiding. And strangely enough, sometimes that alone makes us feel lighter. No new solution appears, no brilliant advice arrives, no miracle occurs. Yet something inside begins to soften. Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, once wrote, "When someone really hears you without passing judgment on you, without trying to take responsibility for you, without trying to mold you, it feels damn good." Perhaps this is one of the most profound statements ever written about empathy, because it touches a deeply human truth, that sometimes what we need most is not someone to fix us, but someone to understand us. Not someone who immediately offers solutions, but someone patient enough to remain with our story. This sounds simple, yet in practice, it is remarkably difficult, because when we see someone we love suffering, our natural instinct is often to fix. We want to do something. We want to help them escape their pain. We want to make things better. We want answers. We want directions. We want healing. And those intentions come from kindness. Yet sometimes that very kindness unintentionally makes another person feel unheard, because they are still inside their emotions. While we have already moved towards solutions, they are still trying to tell the story. While we are trying to finish it, they still want understanding. While we are trying to repair, Carl Jung spent decades listening to his patients. What made him extraordinary was not only his intellect, but his presence. His ability to remain with difficult experiences, his ability to avoid rushing toward conclusions, his ability to tolerate uncertainty. Jung once wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble." At first, this may sound pessimistic, but it is actually deeply humane, because Jung was suggesting that some forms of suffering cannot be solved immediately. Some questions have no perfect answers. Some losses cannot be erased. Some wounds cannot disappear. because of a single piece of advice. And in those moments, the most valuable gift is not an answer. It is presence. Presence is a curious thing. It makes no noise. It does not shine. It cannot be measured in money. Yet it possesses extraordinary healing power. Think about the people who helped you through the hardest periods of your life. Chances are, what you remember most is not what they said, but that they were there. They sat beside you. They listened. They stayed. They did not judge. They did not try to change you. They simply remained present. Human beings often underestimate the power of this. We live in a world that loves efficiency, solutions, speed, and fixing things. But the human soul is not a machine. Not every wound needs immediate repair. Not every emotion needs removal. Not every tear is a problem waiting to be solved. Sometimes a tear only needs to be witnessed. A sorrow only needs acknowledgement. A heart only needs listening. That is why listening is one of the most powerful acts of empathy. Not listening in order to reply. Not listening in order to debate. Not listening in order to correct, but listening in order to understand. Stephen Covey once wrote, "Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply." Perhaps this is one of the most common habits of human beings. While someone else is speaking, our minds are already preparing a response. We think about what we will say next. We construct arguments. We search for solutions. We wait for our turn. And in the process, much is missed. The silences, the unspoken emotions, the meanings hidden between words, the cries for help concealed behind calm appearances. A skilled listener hears more than words. They hear what remains unsaid. They notice the trembling in a voice, the eyes that avoid contact, the forced smile, the unusual pauses, and sometimes they understand more from silence than from language itself. Jung was deeply interested in this. He believed much of psychological life exists beneath conscious awareness. And because of that, the most important things are not always spoken directly. That is why presence matters. Because when we are truly present, we begin to sense deeper layers within another person. Not through guessing, but through attention. Not through analysis, but through connection. Perhaps this is the beauty of empathy. It does not seek control. It does not seek direction. It does not impose. Empathy does not say, "I know what is best for you." Empathy says, "I'm here with you." Those are two entirely different worlds. One is about power. The other is about connection. One seeks to lead. The other seeks to accompany. And strangely enough, companionship often creates deeper change than advice ever can. Because when people feel understood, they begin to discover their own answers. Carl Rogers observed that psychological growth does not come from excessive instruction. It comes from being given a safe space in which to explore oneself. Empathy creates that space. Listening creates that space. Presence creates that space. And within that space, healing quietly begins. Perhaps this is why the most empathetic people are rarely the ones who speak the most. They are the ones who listen the deepest, who do not rush to interrupt, do not rush to fix, do not rush to prove themselves right. They are patient enough to stay, calm enough to wait, and humble enough to know that sometimes the best thing they can do is nothing at all. Simply be present, simply listen, simply remain there. And as we begin to understand the power of listening, we also discover something else. That empathy, as beautiful as it is, carries a shadow side. Because when we continually encounter suffering, when we continually listen to stories of pain, when we continually open ourselves to the emotions of others, we can become exhausted, drained, emotionally depleted. This is a very real phenomenon in modern psychology, and it is the journey we will explore in the next section. Part 15. The fatigue of empathy. As we concluded the previous section, we explored a very gentle truth that sometimes what people need most is not advice, not solutions, not someone wise enough to fix everything, but someone present enough to listen, someone willing to sit beside them. Without rushing, without judging, without controlling, simply being there, we saw that genuine presence can heal places that words cannot reach. That being understood is one of the deepest human experiences. Yet it is precisely here that another question emerges. If empathy is so beautiful, if listening is such a precious gift, why do some of the most empathetic people become the most exhausted? Why do people who spend their lives caring for others sometimes feel depleted? Why do open hearts sometimes become heavy? And why do those who constantly help others occasionally feel completely empty? This is a deeply human paradox, and it has become an increasingly important subject in modern psychology. Researchers call it compassion fatigue or empathy fatigue, different terms describing a similar experience, a state in which the heart becomes overloaded after prolonged exposure to suffering. Carl Jung once wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." Perhaps this quote captures the journey of deeply empathetic people remarkably well, because to truly connect with others, we sometimes must enter the darker regions of life. Stories of loss, pain, trauma, loneliness, heartbreak, tears, goodbyes, broken dreams. And when this happens repeatedly over long periods of time, the soul requires rest, because the human heart, no matter how vast, still has limits. Imagine an oncologist working with cancer patients, a nurse in an intensive care unit, a psychotherapist listening to stories of trauma, a social worker, someone caring for an aging parent, or even a person who constantly consumes heartbreaking news from around the world. Day after day, they encounter heavy stories, powerful emotions, profound losses. At first, empathy helps them connect, but without balance, that same gift can become a burden, not because they are weak, but because they are human. Carl Rogers once observed, "The degree to which I can create relationships which facilitate the growth of others as separate persons is a measure of the growth I have achieved in myself." The fascinating word in that sentence is separate, distinct, independent, separate, because one of the most common mistakes highly empathetic people make is unconsciously merging with the emotions of others. They do not merely understand the pain, they carry it home. They do not merely listen to the story, they begin to live inside the story. They do not merely witness tears, they carry those tears into their sleep. Over time, this creates an invisible burden, a quiet exhaustion, a depletion that is difficult to name, a feeling many people describe with the words, "I have nothing left to give." Jung paid special attention to the idea of psychological boundaries. He understood that to help others sustainably, a person must first preserve their own inner wholeness. Because if we continuously absorb suffering without learning how to put it down, we gradually lose our vitality. It is much like an oil lamp. To continue shining, it must be refilled. No flame can burn forever without fuel. This is why rest is not selfish. It is responsibility. Rest is part of empathy, not only for others, but for ourselves. In modern culture, many people feel guilty about resting. They believe that if they stop, they are not caring enough. If they step back, they are selfish. If they say no, they lack kindness. But the truth is often the opposite. An exhausted heart cannot care for others indefinitely. An overwhelmed mind cannot listen deeply. A depleted body cannot continue giving. Poet Mary Oliver once wrote, "You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." Perhaps that includes allowing ourselves to rest, to breathe, to recover, to return to ourselves. Another deeply important element is boundaries. The word boundary sometimes sounds cold, yet boundaries are actually an act of love. A boundary does not say, "I do not care about you." A boundary says, "I care about you, and I also care about myself." Healthy empathy does not mean absorbing every emotion. It means recognizing emotion without drowning in it. like standing beside a river and watching the water flow. You see it, you understand it, but you do not need to jump in to prove that you care. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Part of that acceptance is acknowledging limits, accepting that we cannot save everyone, cannot solve every form of suffering, cannot carry the entire world on our shoulders. And that realization does not make us bad people. It simply makes us human." In recent years, researchers have begun distinguishing between two fascinating concepts: empathy and compassion. Empathy allows us to feel another person's pain. Compassion inspires us to alleviate that pain. The difference may sound small, but its impact is profound. When we have only empathy, we can become overwhelmed. When compassion is added, we remain connected while staying grounded. Researcher Tanya Singer described this beautifully. Empathy is like stepping into another person's pain. Compassion is like bringing a light with you when you enter. A compassionate person does not turn away from suffering, but neither are they consumed by it. They see the pain, acknowledge the pain, and respond with kindness, not only toward others, but also toward themselves. Perhaps this is the most important lesson of this chapter. Empathy does not require self-sacrifice. It does not require becoming a container for all the suffering in the world. It does not require exhaustion as proof of goodness. Mature empathy is always accompanied by self-care, by rest, by boundaries, by compassion, because the goal is not to feel as much pain as possible. The goal is to love sustainably, to love without losing yourself, to love while still having enough energy to continue the journey. And when we look even deeper, we discover that there are certain conditions that naturally reduce empathy. Not because we become worse people, but because the brain is trying to protect itself. When we are stressed, sleep-deprived, hungry, lonely, or afraid, our ability to connect with others often begins to shrink. And that is the journey we will explore in the next section, and part C's, the things that reduce empathy. As we concluded the previous section, we explored a deeply human truth, that even the most empathetic hearts can become tired, that even the people who are always willing to listen can run out of energy, that even those who spend their lives caring for others need care themselves. We discovered that empathy is not an unlimited resource. It is more like the flame inside a lamp. If it is to continue shining, it must be nourished. If it is to continue warming others, it must be protected from the winds that threaten to extinguish it. And naturally, another question arises. If empathy is a natural human ability, if the brain appears designed for connection, if we are born with the capacity to sense one another's emotions, why do we sometimes become cold? Why are there days when we become more impatient, more judgmental, more irritable, less compassionate? Has kindness disappeared? Or is something else happening beneath the surface? Modern neuroscience offers a fascinating answer. Most of the time, the problem is not that we have lost our capacity for empathy. The problem is that the brain has shifted into a different mode, an older mode, a mode that prioritizes survival over connection. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Perhaps this quote also applies to the moments when empathy seems to disappear, because many times we think we are becoming selfish, when in reality, the brain is responding to pressure, trying to protect itself, prioritizing survival. To understand this, imagine one of our ancestors tens of thousands of years ago, a person walking through a forest, suddenly hearing movement behind a bush. In that instant, the brain does not need empathy. It does not need philosophy. It does not need deep reflection. What it needs is speed, fight, flight, or freeze. The survival system takes over, and when that happens, many subtle capacities temporarily fade into the background, including empathy. Today, we rarely face predators, but our brains still operate according to ancient principles. When stress becomes chronic, when exhaustion builds, when sleep disappears, when fear rises, when we feel threatened, the nervous system begins prioritizing self-protection over connection. This is why stress is one of empathy's greatest enemies. As stress rises, the world becomes smaller, psychological vision narrows, attention turns inward. People become focused on what they need to do in order to survive the pressure. This is entirely natural, but it also reduces our ability to notice the emotions of others. Most of us have experienced this. A brutally exhausting workday, a week full of pressure, a season of constant worry, and suddenly ordinary things become irritating. A simple question feels annoying. A small mistake triggers anger. A conversation feels overwhelming. Not because we have become bad people, but because our nervous system is depleted. Jung observed that when people become overwhelmed, they often fall back on their most primitive reactions. The most mature parts of the psyche temporarily step aside. Protective mechanisms move to the front. And that brings us to another powerful factor: sleep deprivation. It is remarkable to think that a single night of poor sleep can affect empathy. Yet research repeatedly confirms this. When people are sleep deprived, their ability to recognize emotions declines. Emotional regulation weakens. Patience decreases. Negative reactions become more common. The brain becomes like an exhausted orchestra conductor. The signals are still there, but coordination becomes less precise. That is why exhausted people often misunderstand each other more easily, argue more frequently, and unintentionally hurt one another more often. Not because love has disappeared, but because the energy required to maintain connection has diminished. Then there is another surprisingly powerful factor: hunger. You may have heard the word hangry, a combination of hungry and angry. It sounds amusing, yet the phenomenon has a very real biological basis. When energy levels drop too low, the brain begins prioritizing basic needs. Patience decreases, psychological flexibility decreases, and the ability to step into another person's perspective decreases as well. Once again, the nervous system returns to its ancient rule: survival first, connection second. The same pattern appears with shame. Shame is a unique emotion, different from sadness, different from anger. Shame makes people want to hide, to withdraw, to avoid being seen. Researcher Brené Brown once wrote, "Shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change." When shame takes hold, the mind becomes trapped in a battle with itself, and very little energy remains for connecting with others. Empathy narrows, not because we do not care, but because we are trying to survive our own inner criticism. Fear creates a similar effect. When fear dominates, the world begins dividing itself into two categories: safe and dangerous. The brain searches for threats, focuses on risks, magnifies differences. In that state, empathy becomes much harder, because empathy requires safety, openness, relaxation, the ability to step outside ourselves and notice another person. But when fear takes control, all resources are directed toward protection. And then there is perhaps the saddest factor of all: loneliness. Paradoxically, a lack of connection can reduce our ability to connect. Studies suggest that prolonged loneliness makes people more vigilant towards social signals, more suspicious, more sensitive to rejection, more prone to misunderstanding others. The brain begins viewing the world through a defensive lens. Like a heart that has been wounded too many times, it learns to close itself in order to survive. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." Perhaps that is why loneliness is not simply the absence of people. It is the absence of genuine connection. And when connection fades, empathy becomes harder to access. But perhaps the most beautiful part of all this is the following: these states are not our true nature. They are only passing clouds. Behind stress remains the capacity to love. Behind exhaustion remains kindness. Behind fear remains connection. behind loneliness remains the longing to belong. The essence of human beings is not indifference, it is connection. Sometimes the nervous system is simply too tired to express it, and that realization offers hope. Because if there are things that reduce empathy, then there must also be things that strengthen it. Experiences that expand the heart, habits that calm the mind, moments that make us feel closer to life and to one another. And that is the journey we will explore in the next section. Par decept, the things that increase empathy. As we concluded the previous section, we journeyed through a familiar landscape of the human soul, a place where stress causes the heart to close, where lack of sleep drains patience, where fear makes the world feel smaller, where loneliness weakens the bridges that connect us. We discovered that empathy does not disappear because people become cold-hearted. Sometimes it is simply hidden, like the sun behind heavy clouds. The light is still there. It is only temporarily obscured. And if there are states that diminish empathy, then a natural question arises. Are there things that help the heart open again? Are there experiences that bring people closer together? Are there gentle pathways that lead us back to our innate capacity for connection? The answer is yes. And what is fascinating is that these things are rarely complicated secrets. They do not require extraordinary talent. They do not demand exceptional intelligence. They do not depend upon modern technology. Many of them are simple experiences human beings have known for thousands of years. A sincere thank you, a moment beneath a sky full of stars, a slow breath, an act of kindness, a warm conversation, a hug, a compassionate glance. These small moments can influence the way the brain functions far more deeply than we often realize. Carl Jung once wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Perhaps this quote captures the spirit of this chapter perfectly, because the things that nourish empathy are rarely loud. They work quietly, gently, yet powerfully. One of the first factors modern science has begun to explore is gratitude. Gratitude is not merely a moral virtue. It is a psychological state, a way of seeing the world, a shift in attention. When we feel grateful, the mind temporarily moves away from what is missing and begins noticing what is already present. It turns away from fear of loss and recognizes the gifts that remain. Interestingly, people who experience gratitude also tend to become more empathetic, because gratitude softens the feeling of isolation. It reminds us that our lives are supported by countless others. A meal, a road, a book, a word of encouragement, a friend, a teacher, a family member. No one truly lives alone. We exist within an invisible network of connection, and when we recognize that, the heart becomes softer. The Roman philosopher Cicero once wrote, "Gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others." Perhaps empathy is one of gratitude's children, because when we recognize how much we have received from life, it becomes easier to open ourselves to others. From gratitude, we move into an even more mysterious experience. Those moments when we stand before something larger than ourselves. A towering mountain range, a sky filled with stars, the sound of ocean waves at night, a piece of music that stirs the heart, an ancient structure that has endured for thousands of years, a newborn child entering the world. Moments like these create what psychologists call a small self. The ego becomes smaller, not in a negative way, but in a beautiful one. Everyday worries suddenly feel less important. Competition fades into the background. Differences between people seem less significant, and empathy expands. Jung was deeply interested in these kinds of transcendent experiences. He believed human beings occasionally need contact with something larger than the personal ego, because in those moments, we remember that we belong to something greater, a community, a culture, humanity itself, a living web that connects us all. Next comes mindfulness meditation, a practice thousands of years old. yet increasingly studied by modern neuroscience. Many people believe meditation means emptying the mind, but mindfulness is actually about learning to be present, to observe, to listen, to notice, without fighting experience, without running from emotions, without becoming lost in thoughts. Through mindfulness, we gradually become aware of our unconscious reactions, and as Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Mindfulness shines light into those hidden places, helping us notice when we are judging, when we are defending ourselves, when we are reacting from fear, and that awareness creates space for empathy to emerge, not only toward others, but toward ourselves as well. From mindfulness, we move one step deeper into loving kindness meditation, compassion meditation. Across many ancient traditions, people practice by silently offering well wishes. For example, "May I be peaceful. May I be healthy. May I be happy." Then, gradually expanding outward, "May my loved ones be peaceful. May strangers be peaceful. May all living beings be peaceful." At first glance, it sounds simple, yet modern studies suggest that practices like these genuinely strengthen empathy and compassion. They are like exercises for the emotional heart. Each practice session gently stretches our capacity to care. Then we arrive at something remarkably practical, helping others. There is a fascinating paradox here. Many people believe empathy leads to kindness, and that is true. But the reverse is also true. Acts of kindness nurture empathy. When we help, when we share, when we support, when we give, the brain begins to experience a stronger sense of connection. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is." This is not a call to self-sacrifice. It is a reminder that meaning often emerges through connection, through stepping beyond the narrow boundaries of the self. And finally, there is positive social connection. Human beings are social creatures. We are designed to connect. A sincere conversation, shared laughter, a meal together, a compassionate glance, a handshake, a simple check-in. These seemingly small moments continually remind the nervous system that the world is still safe, that other people are not always threats, that connection still exists, that we are not alone. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Perhaps that is the essence of empathy. Not one person rescuing another, not a one-way exchange, but mutual transformation. Every genuine encounter leaves a trace. Every act of deep listening enriches both people involved. Every moment of connection subtly reshapes both the brain and the heart. And when we step back and look at everything we have explored, a beautiful truth emerges. Empathy is not created solely through effort. It is nourished by our inner environment, by gratitude, by presence, by kindness, by positive relationships, by our ability to return to our own hearts. Yet another question now arises. Empathy helps us connect. It helps us heal. It helps us understand. But what happens when relationships are wounded? When conflict appears? When trust is broken? When two people no longer understand one another? Perhaps it is in those difficult moments that the true value of empathy is tested. And that is the journey we will explore next. Part 18. Empathy in relationships. As we concluded the previous chapter, we explored many of the experiences that help the heart expand. Gratitude, moments of wonder before the beauty of life, mindfulness, loving kindness meditation, acts of kindness, and positive social connections. All of these experiences lead us toward a common realization that we are not separate from one another. That beneath countless differences of age, culture, status, and circumstance, human beings share many of the same needs: to be seen, to be understood, to belong. And perhaps nowhere do these needs become more visible than in relationships, within families, within romantic love, within friendships, within brief encounters, and within relationships that last a lifetime. If empathy is a bridge between souls, then relationships are the places where that bridge is tested most often, because the closer we become, the more capable we are of hurting one another. The deeper we love, the more vulnerable we become to disappointment. The stronger the attachment, the deeper conflict can cut. This may sound sad, but it is completely natural. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This may be one of the most profound observations ever made about relationships. Most of the time, we believe conflict exists because of the other person, because they said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing, misunderstood us, acted unfairly. Yet Jung recognized that conflict often reflects something within ourselves as well. Our expectations, old wounds, hidden fears, unspoken needs, unrecognized parts of the unconscious. And so every relationship is more than a meeting of two people. It is a meeting of two inner worlds, two life histories, two collections of memories, two systems of belief, two hearts carrying different scars. When we see relationships through this lens, we begin to understand why empathy matters so deeply. Without empathy, conflict becomes a battle over who is right. With empathy, conflict becomes an opportunity for deeper understanding. One of the clearest examples of this is an apology. At first glance, apologizing seems simple, just a few words. "I'm sorry." Yet many apologies fail to heal, because they lack the most important ingredient, empathy. A meaningful apology does not merely acknowledge an action, it acknowledges emotional impact. It does not simply say, "I did that." It also says, "I understand how much that hurt you." That difference is enormous, because people are often hurt most deeply, not by what happened, but by feeling that their pain has not been seen. Psychologist Harriet Lerner once wrote, "The best apology has three parts. I was wrong. I'm sorry. How can I make this better?" What is fascinating is that all three parts require empathy. They require stepping outside the self and seeing the situation through another person's eyes, and that is not easy, because our natural instinct is self-protection, to explain, to justify, to prove that we were not entirely wrong. But empathy asks something different. It asks for courage. The courage to see the consequences of our actions. The courage to remain with discomfort. The courage to place connection above the need to win. And from apology, we move into an even more difficult territory, forgiveness. Perhaps few words are both as beautiful and as complicated. Many people believe forgiveness means forgetting or accepting everything that happened. But empathy offers another perspective. Forgiveness is not denying the wound. Forgiveness is refusing to let the wound control the future. Carl Jung observed that the things we refuse to face often continue living in the shadows of the mind. He called this the shadow. Unprocessed emotions, unacknowledged anger, unhealed pain. Forgiveness does not mean pushing these things deeper into the darkness. It means looking directly at them, understanding them, and then choosing not to let them govern our lives any longer. This does not mean every relationship must continue. Sometimes empathy also means accepting distance, creating boundaries, or walking away. Forgiveness is not always a return to what once was. Sometimes it is simply laying down a burden we have carried for too long. And from forgiveness comes healing, repair, trust, and ultimately, the possibility that relationships can emerge stronger than before. Just as the Japanese art of kintsugi fills cracks with gold, empathy allows human relationships to transform wounds into wisdom. Not because suffering is good, but because healing creates depth, and perhaps that is one of the most beautiful truths about relationships. Every person we love, every person we lose, every person we forgive, every person who listens to us, every person we genuinely try to understand, leaves a mark, and in a quiet, almost invisible way, helps shape who we become. When we look back at everything we have explored, we begin to see that empathy is more than an emotion. It is the glue that holds relationships together, the bridge that spans misunderstandings, the light that guides difficult conversations, the foundation upon which trust is built, and the path that leads toward healing. Yet empathy does not belong only to families or romantic relationships. It also influences another place where many people spend a large portion of their lives: the workplace. Teams, leaders, negotiations, organizations, communities. Does empathy matter there as well? Is it merely a personal quality? Or can it become a force that creates collective change? That is the journey we will explore in the next chapter. Part 19. Empathy in Work and Leadership. As we concluded the previous chapter, we traveled through some of the most familiar landscapes of human life: family, friendship, love, the encounters that change a life forever, the wounds, the apologies, the acts of forgiveness, the bridges rebuilt after they were broken. We discovered that empathy is more than the ability to feel another person's emotions. It is the glue that keeps relationships from falling apart whenever storms arrive. It is the art of seeing the human being behind the behavior, the ability to remain together even when we do not entirely agree. But as the night grows deeper, another question begins to emerge. What happens when we step beyond our families, beyond our closest relationships, into the world of work? The offices, the factories, the shops, the hospitals, the schools, the companies, the organizations. Does empathy still matter there? Or is it merely a quality reserved for personal life? For many decades, the world believed that work and emotion should remain separate. That efficiency came from logic. That leadership meant control. That success meant competition. That feelings should be left outside the office door. Yet the deeper psychologists studied human beings, the more they discovered a fascinating truth. People cannot leave their hearts at home and bring only their brains to work. We bring our whole selves, our hopes, our fears, our pressures, our dreams, our wounds, and our deeply human needs. The need to be respected, to be heard, to be recognized, to belong. Carl Jung once wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." At first glance, this may seem like a statement about psychotherapy, but it is also a foundation of leadership, because effective leaders do not simply manage tasks, they manage relationships between people. And to do that, they must understand people, beginning with themselves. For years, studies on teamwork have consistently shown that technical skill, while important, is not the only factor that determines success. A team filled with brilliant experts may still struggle. Meanwhile, an ordinary team that knows how to cooperate often achieves extraordinary results. What creates that difference? Part of the answer lies in empathy. When people feel heard, they are more willing to share ideas. When they feel safe, they become more creative. When they feel respected, collaboration becomes easier. Researcher Amy Edmondson calls this psychological safety, an environment where people do not constantly need to defend themselves, where they are not afraid of being ridiculed, not afraid of being diminished, not afraid of making mistakes. When psychological safety exists, cooperation flourishes, and empathy is one of the foundations upon which it is built, because it is difficult to feel safe around someone who never tries to understand you, yet remarkably easy to open up to someone who genuinely listens. Jung observed that human beings are driven not only by reason, they are also guided by deep unconscious needs. An employee does not work solely for a paycheck. A customer does not buy only a product. A colleague does not complete a task merely to check a box. Behind every action lies a psychological need, the desire to be valued, to have meaning, to feel significant, to belong to something larger than oneself. Great leaders understand this. not because they memorized a theory, but because they genuinely care. Simon Sinek once wrote, "Leadership is not about being in charge. It is about taking care of those in your charge." Perhaps this is one of the most beautiful definitions of leadership, because it shifts the focus from power to responsibility, from control to understanding, from command to service. Empathetic leaders are not weak. They still make difficult decisions. They still uphold high standards. They still take responsibility for outcomes. But they understand that behind every job title is a person, and behind every person is a story. This understanding also helps address one of the most common challenges in the modern world: burnout. For many years, burnout was viewed as an individual problem. People assumed it happened because someone lacked resilience, was not strong enough, could not manage time properly. But researchers increasingly recognize that burnout is often an environmental issue. People do not burn out simply because they work hard. They burn out because they work in isolation, without support, without recognition, without understanding. Empathy cannot eliminate a heavy workload, but it can reduce the feeling of facing that workload alone. A manager asking, "Are you doing okay?" A colleague willing to listen. A team that supports one another. These things matter far more than we realize, because human beings possess an astonishing ability to endure hardship, as long as they do not endure it alone. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." The same is true at work. Meaning does not remove pressure, but it makes pressure easier to carry. And empathy is one of the strongest paths toward meaning, because it reminds us that work is not merely about tasks. It is about people, not merely about results, but about relationships, not merely about profit, but about creating value for the lives of others. This becomes especially clear in negotiation. Many people imagine negotiation as a battle, a contest of winning, a process of getting what you want. Yet the best negotiators often begin not by speaking, but by listening. Former FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss has repeatedly emphasized the importance of understanding emotions before solving problems, because behind every demand is a need, behind every position is a fear or a hope, and once those deeper realities become visible, solutions often emerge naturally. Empathy does not weaken negotiation. It makes negotiation wiser. From there, we begin to understand why empathy also shapes customer loyalty. Because customers are human beings. They remember more than products. They remember how they were treated, how respected they felt, how listened to they felt, how much they mattered. Maya Angelou once wrote, "People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel." Perhaps this is the foundation of every outstanding service experience. Not perfection, but humanity. Not emotional distance, but connection. Jung believed that every organization ultimately reflects the psychology of the people inside it. A company is not merely a machine. A school is not merely a building. A hospital is not merely a system. They are networks of relationships between human beings. And the quality of those relationships determines the quality of the organization itself. Perhaps this is why empathy is not a soft skill. It is a core capability, a form of intelligence, a way of understanding people, the ability to see beyond numbers and recognize the hearts behind them. And when we look back upon everything we have explored, we arrive at a simple truth. Empathy does not reduce effectiveness. It makes effectiveness sustainable. It does not lower standards. It makes standards more humane. It does not replace competence. It helps competence be used in a better way. Yet another question now emerges. If empathy can transform families, if it can transform workplaces, can it also transform larger systems, hospitals, schools, courts, the institutions where millions of people encounter one another every day? That is the journey we will explore next. Empathy in healthcare, education, and justice. As we concluded the previous chapter, we stepped beyond the private worlds of family and friendship into the broader landscape of work and leadership. We discovered that empathy is not a sign of weakness. It does not reduce effectiveness. It does not weaken standards. It does not make people less decisive. Quite the opposite. Empathy helps groups function more effectively. It helps leaders understand people more deeply. And it helps organizations become more sustainable. Yet a larger question now emerges. If empathy can transform a team, can it transform entire systems through which millions of people pass during their lives? The places where people appear at their most vulnerable, when they are sick, when they fail, when they make mistakes, when they need help, places such as hospitals, schools, and courts. At first glance, these environments seem built upon rules, procedures, and expertise. Yet the more closely we observe, the more we realize that behind every procedure is a human being, a worried patient, a student trying to understand the world, a person facing the consequences of a mistake. And in these places, empathy often makes a greater difference than we imagine. Carl Jung once wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, their love is lacking." Of course, Jung was not suggesting that society abandon rules, nor that hospitals should function without expertise, or that courts should ignore justice. What he was reminding us is that when systems become only power and procedure, they risk forgetting their original purpose. And that purpose always involves people. Perhaps nowhere is this clearer than in healthcare. Imagine someone walking into a hospital. On paper, they are a file, a diagnosis, a test result, a medical record number. But in reality, they are a human being who is afraid. Perhaps they have just received troubling news. Perhaps they are in pain. Perhaps they do not know what comes next. Perhaps they are thinking about their family, their future, the things they have not yet done. In moments like these, what patients need is not only medicine. They need the feeling of being seen, being heard, being treated as a person rather than a clinical case. Physician Francis Peabody once wrote, "The secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient." It sounds simple, yet decades of research have shown that this principle has real consequences. When patients feel heard, they trust more. When trust increases, treatment adherence improves. And when adherence improves, health outcomes often improve as well. In other words, empathy is not merely a moral value, it is also a practical factor in healing. Something similar happens in education. A child enters a classroom carrying more than books. They bring their inner world, their joys, their worries, their insecurities, their unanswered questions, their family experiences, their invisible wounds. Many people think education is simply the transfer of knowledge, but educational psychologists have long understood that learning and emotion cannot be separated. A child who feels safe learns better. A child who feels respected grows more confident. A child who feels understood becomes more open to knowledge. Educator Rita Pierson once said, "Every child deserves a champion." Perhaps that is a form of empathy, not empathy expressed through tears, but through belief. The belief that behind confusing behaviors is a human being still growing, a soul learning how to become itself. Jung was deeply interested in childhood. He believed many psychological patterns are formed very early in life, and because of that, the way adults see children can influence them for decades. A word of encouragement can last a lifetime, but so can humiliation. An empathetic teacher does more than teach information. They help shape how a child sees themselves. They help a child believe they have value, that they can grow, that they are allowed to make mistakes, that they are allowed to learn. And that is the foundation of all development. From schools, we move into a more complicated place, the legal system. Perhaps no area creates more uncertainty when empathy is discussed, because some people wonder, if we become too empathetic, does justice suffer? If we focus on circumstances, do we neglect personal responsibility? These are important questions, and they remind us that empathy must be balanced by fairness. Empathy does not mean every action is excused. It does not erase consequences. It does not make laws weak. It simply means trying to understanding what led to a behavior, understanding the context, understanding the motivations, understanding the psychological and social forces involved, and after understanding, society must still decide what is fair, what protects the community, what preserves order. The theologian Reinhold Niebuhr once wrote, "Justice without mercy is cruelty. Mercy without justice is sentimentality." Perhaps this is one of the most balanced descriptions of empathy's role within law. A healthy society requires both: the willingness to understand people and the willingness to protect shared principles. Jung believed that every human being carries both light and shadow, the capacity to love and the capacity to harm, the ability to create and the ability to destroy. If we deny the shadow, we become naive. But if we see only the shadow, we become bitter. Empathy allows us to hold both truths at once, to recognize mistakes without denying humanity, to acknowledge consequences without rejecting the possibility of change. This is one reason many modern justice systems have become increasingly interested in restorative justice, an approach that asks not only what punishment is deserved, but also, how can healing occur? How can this harm be repaired? How can the community become stronger afterward? This is not a replacement for justice. It is an expansion of justice. And at the center of that process lies empathy. When we look back at hospitals, schools, and courts, a beautiful realization emerges. The best systems do more than function efficiently. They help people feel human, not reduced to numbers, not reduced to files, not reduced to cases, but seen as unique individuals with unique stories. Perhaps that is what Jung spent his life reminding us, that every human being is a world unto themselves, a world that cannot be fully understood through statistics, cannot be fully measured through data, cannot be completely explained through procedures. To truly understand people, we must preserve our capacity for empathy, the ability to imagine another person's experience, the ability to see the soul behind the behavior. And when we reflect on all of this, we discover that empathy does not begin in large institutions. It begins much closer to home, in the place where people first learn how to love, where their earliest emotional patterns are formed, where a child first learns whether the world can be trusted. That place is the family, and that is the journey we will explore next. Part 21. Empathy in family and parenting. As we concluded the previous chapter, we journeyed through some of the largest spaces in human society: the hospitals where people seek healing, the schools where knowledge is passed from one generation to the next, the legal systems where society attempts to balance justice with compassion. And in each of those places, we discovered a remarkably similar truth, that behind every procedure, every rule, every system, there is always a human being. A person who is hoping, a person who is afraid, a person who is trying to be understood. And if we continue following that thread, eventually we arrive at the place where it all begins. Not the hospital, not the school, not the workplace, but the family. The first place where a human being learns what it feels like to be loved. The first place where a child begins to understand the world. The first place where the heart learns either safety or uncertainty. The first place where empathy appears. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." It is a profound observation, because Jung understood that children do not learn only from what adults say. They learn from how adults live, from how adults love, from how adults treat themselves, from how adults face their emotions, from how adults respond to suffering. A child who grows up in an empathetic environment does not merely hear lessons about kindness. They live inside kindness. They feel kindness. they are surrounded by it, and over time, it quietly becomes part of their psychological foundation. Today, psychologists often call this foundation secure attachment, a concept first developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth. They discovered that what matters most to young children is not expensive toys, not early academic achievement, not perfection, but the feeling that someone is there when they are needed. Someone who notices their fear, someone who responds when they cry, someone who helps them feel safe. That consistent presence creates something the child's brain remembers for a lifetime, a fundamental belief that the world is relatively safe, that people can be trusted, that they are worthy of love. Perhaps that is the greatest gift empathy can offer, not in a single day, not through a lecture, but through thousands of small moments. A gentle glance, a hug, a comforting word, a moment of patience, a moment of listening. Carl Rogers, one of the most influential humanistic psychologists of the 20th century, once wrote, "When someone really hears you without passing judgment on you, without trying to take responsibility for you, without trying to mold you, it feels damn good." This is true for adults, but it may be even more true for children, because during the early years of life, the brain develops at an astonishing pace. Every experience leaves an imprint. Every interaction helps shape how a child sees themselves. If a child is consistently listened to, they learn that their feelings matter. If they are consistently dismissed, they may learn the opposite. If they are regularly understood, they learn how to understand others. If they are constantly judged, they may learn to judge themselves. This is why empathy is not merely a parenting skill. It is the psychological environment in which personality develops. One of the most important gifts empathy offers children is emotional regulation. At first, this may sound surprising. Emotions seem like something personal, something that happens entirely inside us. But children do not naturally know how to calm their fears. They do not automatically know how to process anger. They do not instinctively know how to move through disappointment. These are learned skills, and they are learned through relationships. When a child cries and an adult remains calm beside them, the child's nervous system slowly learns calmness. When a child is frightened and receives reassurance, the brain learns that strong emotions are not dangerous. When a child is angry and receives guidance instead of humiliation, they learn to manage anger rather than be controlled by it. Psychiatrist Daniel Siegel describes this process with a simple phrase: name it to tame it. Because when an emotion is seen and named, it becomes easier to handle. Empathy is the act of helping another person recognize their inner world, especially a child. Jung was deeply interested in the mother archetype within the collective unconscious. He viewed it as one of humanity's most powerful symbols. The mother represented nurturing, protection, acceptance, life itself. Of course, today we understand that this role does not belong exclusively to mothers, fathers, grandparents, caregivers. Anyone who shows up with love can become that source of safety. The title matters less than the quality of presence, because children remember feelings more than words. They remember being held when they were afraid, being listened to when they were sad, being accepted when they made mistakes. And from these experiences, they begin building an internal model of love, of intimacy, of relationships. This is one reason why the early years have such a profound influence on later life. A child who grows up feeling safe often finds it easier to trust, easier to connect, easier to share emotions, easier to build healthy intimacy, not because their life is perfect, but because they carry a foundational belief that connection is possible. On the other hand, experiences lacking empathy can create invisible wounds: the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear of judgment, the fear of showing one's true self. And these fears often follow people into adulthood, into romantic relationships, into marriage, into friendships, into workplaces. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of understanding childhood, not to blame the past, but to understand the present. He once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When we understand the patterns formed in childhood, we gain the opportunity to change them. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that this journey is not reserved for children alone. Adults can learn empathy too. They can heal. They can develop healthier forms of attachment. They can become the person they once needed when they were young. Perhaps that is one of life's most beautiful journeys. From being loved, to learning how to love. From being understood, to learning how to understand. From being healed, to learning how to help heal others. Yet when we widen our view beyond the family, another fascinating observation appears. Human beings tend to empathize most easily with people who resemble themselves. People who share their language, their culture, their beliefs, their community. Empathy toward those who are different is often much more difficult. Why is that? What causes the mind to unconsciously divide the world into us and them? And can the circle of empathy be expanded? That is the journey we will explore next. Part 22, Empathy and Bias. As we concluded the previous chapter, we return to the place where all relationships begin, the family. The place where a child first learns what it feels like to be loved, to be seen, to be heard, to trust. And there we discovered that empathy does not appear by accident. It is nurtured day after day, through gentle eyes, through comforting embraces, through words of reassurance, through moments of understanding. But as we grow older and step beyond the embrace of family into the wider world, we encounter a far more complex reality, because the world is not filled only with people who resemble us. It is filled with differences. Differences in age, language, culture, beliefs, life experiences, ways of seeing the world. And here, a fascinating phenomenon begins to emerge. We often find it easier to empathize with people who are similar to us, easier to understand those whose experiences resemble our own, easier to care about those who belong to our group. Meanwhile, people who seem different may appear unfamiliar, distant, or even suspicious. This does not mean human beings are cruel. It is simply part of how the brain evolved. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors survived in small groups. Recognizing who belonged to one's group offered a survival advantage. Who could be trusted? Who would help during danger? Who would share food? Who would protect the community? As a result, the brain developed a tendency to classify quickly. Us and them. These invisible labels are often created within seconds, sometimes before we are even aware of it. Carl Jung was among the first thinkers to recognize the deep psychological dimensions of this phenomenon. He observed that many of our assumptions about other people are actually reflections of ourselves. He called this projection. Projection. Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." At first, this statement may sound strange, but consider it for a moment. Sometimes the qualities that provoke the strongest reactions in us are connected to parts of ourselves we have not fully accepted. A highly confident person may irritate someone who struggles with self-doubt. A free-spirited individual may unsettle someone who feels trapped by rules. Someone different may challenge beliefs we have always taken for granted. And when that happens, bias often appears. Bias is not necessarily hatred, at least not in most cases. More often, it begins with something far simpler: a misunderstanding, an assumption, an incomplete story, a conclusion reached too quickly. The brain loves simplicity. Human beings are complex, and so a gap emerges. Jung was especially interested in what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we would rather not see, rejected emotions, hidden fears, traits that do not fit the image we wish to present to the world. And interestingly, those rejected parts are often projected onto other people. We see in them what we do not wish to see in ourselves. That is why some of our strongest judgments arise in the most unexpected places, not from understanding, but from misunderstanding, not from truth, but from unconscious processes. And this phenomenon extends far beyond individuals. It affects groups, communities, nations, cultures. Human history contains countless examples of people mistreating those who seemed different, not because they truly understood one another, but because they never did. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "We must learn to live together as brothers, or perish together as fools." The statement carries more than political meaning. It expresses a profound psychological truth. The farther apart people feel, the easier it becomes to fear one another. The more fear grows, the harder empathy becomes. And the less empathy exists, the easier conflict emerges. Yet there is reason for hope. Bias is not destiny. It can be softened, expanded, transformed. And one of the most powerful paths toward that transformation is contact, meeting people who are different, listening to their stories, understanding their experiences, seeing the world through their eyes. Many studies in social psychology have shown that positive contact between different groups significantly reduces prejudice, because unfamiliarity slowly becomes familiarity. Labels are replaced by faces. Stereotypes are replaced by stories. An immigrant is no longer an abstract concept, but a father, a mother, a child, a human being carrying hopes and fears much like our own. A person of another faith is no longer a symbol of difference, but someone searching for meaning just as we are. A person from another country is no longer an outsider, but a human being loving, hoping, and suffering in ways remarkably similar to ourselves. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Perhaps this idea applies not only to individuals but to societies as well. A mature society is one that feels secure enough not to fear difference, because it understands that diversity is not a threat, but an opportunity to expand awareness. Another powerful way to broaden empathy is through cooperation toward a shared goal. Interestingly, when people work together to solve a common problem, rigid boundaries often begin to dissolve. A natural disaster, a community project, a great mission, a shared challenge. These experiences remind people that they need one another, and as they work together, they begin to see one another as human beings rather than labels. This reflects a beautiful truth. Connection often grows strongest when we direct our attention towards something larger than ourselves. Perhaps that is why moments of unity so often emerge during times of difficulty, because it is during those moments that our shared humanity becomes most visible. And this brings us to one final idea: expanding the circle of concern. Biologist Edward O. Wilson suggested that moral progress can be understood as the gradual expansion of the circle of people we care about. First, the family, then the tribe, then the community, then the nation, and eventually humanity itself. Empathy grows in much the same way. It often begins with those closest to us, but it does not have to end there. Each time we try to understand someone different, each time we listen to an unfamiliar story, each time we ask questions instead of rushing to judgment, that circle expands a little more. Not because we become perfect, but because we become more human. Jung often reminded us that maturity is a process of expanding consciousness. And perhaps part of that expansion is realizing that behind every label is a person. Behind every difference are familiar emotions. Behind every life are hopes, fears, and the longing to be loved. When we look back upon everything we have explored, we recognize that bias is not evidence of human wickedness. It is a natural tendency of the brain. But if we stop there, we remain trapped in a very small world. Empathy invites us to go further, to see more broadly, to understand more deeply, and to open our hearts a little wider. Yet another question now appears. If empathy is shaped by the stories we tell ourselves about other people, what happens when those stories are transmitted through language, literature, and culture? Can stories expand empathy, or can they sometimes narrow it? That is the journey we will explore next. Parfum 3, language, stories, and culture. As we concluded the previous chapter, we explored one of the quietest limitations of empathy: bias, the natural tendency that makes human beings more willing to open their hearts to those who resemble them, more likely to trust people from their own group, more inclined to sympathize with familiar stories. Yet we also discovered something beautiful. Bias is not a prison. It is a doorway, and every time a person is willing to step beyond the boundaries of their familiar world, that doorway opens a little wider. A conversation with someone different, a moment of listening instead of judging, an effort to understand a life unlike our own. Each of these has the power to expand our circle of concern. But then another question arises. If much of human understanding comes from the stories we tell about one another, what creates those stories? What shapes the way we describe emotions? What causes two people to look at the same event and experience it so differently? What allows a novel to move us to tears for a character who never existed? And why do different cultures love, suffer, and hope in such different ways? To answer these questions, we must enter a very special landscape, the landscape of language, stories, and culture. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying the symbols that appeared in dreams, myths, and legends from cultures around the world. He noticed that even people separated by great distances often told remarkably similar stories. Stories about heroes, mothers, wise elders, darkness, rebirth, love, loss. He called these recurring patterns archetypes, psychological templates that seem to exist deep within humanity's collective unconscious. His observations suggest something fascinating. Human beings do not live by food alone, nor by work alone. We live by stories. We understand ourselves through stories. We understand others through stories. And we understand the world through stories. But before stories can be told, there must be language. Language is not merely a tool for communication. It is a lens through which we view reality. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." It is an astonishingly profound insight, because sometimes we fail to understand something not because it does not exist, but because we do not yet have the words to name it. Consider emotions. A small child may know only a few simple words: happy, sad, angry, afraid. But as we grow older, we learn dozens of additional shades of feeling: disappointment, regret, loneliness, gratitude, peacefulness, admiration, longing, hope. Each new word is like a lamp being switched on inside the inner world, helping us recognize experiences that once felt vague and difficult to grasp. Psychiatrist Daniel Siegel often emphasizes a simple phrase: name it to tame it. When an emotion has a name, it becomes easier to understand, easier to manage, less frightening. This suggests that language does not merely describe emotions. It helps shape the way we experience them. Jung understood this deeply. He believed that many profound psychological experiences first emerge as images, symbols, and feelings. Only later do they become words. In that sense, language serves as a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious mind. It allows us to share what once existed only inside ourselves. And when something can be shared, empathy begins to grow. Because it is difficult to empathize with what we cannot understand. But when a feeling finds its way into language, it becomes more accessible, more tangible, more human. Perhaps that is one reason stories possess such extraordinary power. Human beings are storytelling creatures. Since the days when our ancestors sat around fires in ancient caves, since the earliest myths, since the first epic poems, since the modern novel, we have always told stories, because stories are among the most effective ways of entering another person's world. When we read a great novel, something remarkable happens. We begin seeing life through the eyes of someone entirely unfamiliar, someone from another era, another culture, another circumstance. another life. Yet for a few brief hours, they become part of us. Harper Lee wrote in To Kill a Mockingbird, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk." Part 25. Empathy and Mental Health. As we concluded the previous chapter, we stepped together into the fascinating world of neuroscience. We saw how regions of the brain, such as the insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the prefrontal cortex, work together to create the experience of empathy. We explored how oxytocin, dopamine, and countless biological signals quietly contribute to the sense of connection between human beings. And perhaps the most beautiful thing neuroscience revealed was this: empathy is not merely an abstract idea, it is a real experience, an experience etched into the nervous system, into the rhythm of the heart, into the breath, into the living body itself. But then another question begins to emerge. If empathy has such a powerful biological foundation, if human beings seem designed for connection, why do some people struggle to understand emotions? Why do some feel isolated, even in the middle of close relationships? Why are some extraordinarily sensitive to the suffering of others, while some seem unable to notice it? Does empathy function the same way in every mind? Or does each person carry a unique emotional map? To explore these questions, we must enter a very delicate territory, the place where empathy and mental health meet. Carl Jung devoted much of his life to studying the hidden depths of the human psyche. He understood that the mind is not a machine that functions identically in everyone. Each individual is a universe of their own, carrying unique memories, unique wounds, unique strengths, and unique limitations. Jung once wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." Perhaps the same is true of empathy, because empathy is not simply something a person either has or lacks. It exists along many spectrums. It is influenced by biology, by environment, by experience, and especially by mental health. Let us begin with one of the most powerful influences of all: trauma. Today, the word trauma is used frequently, yet we sometimes forget what it truly means. Trauma is not only what happened, it is what remains within the nervous system after the event has ended. A child raised in an unsafe environment, a person who has experienced violence, someone who suddenly loses a loved one, someone who has lived through war, all may carry deep imprints within the mind. When the nervous system must remain constantly alert in order to survive, it begins prioritizing safety over connection. Instead of asking, "What is this person feeling?" the brain may ask, "Is this person dangerous?" This is not selfishness. It is survival. A deeply wounded person may struggle to open their heart not because they lack empathy, but because their nervous system is still trying to protect them. What is particularly interesting is that trauma can produce two very different responses. Some people become extraordinarily sensitive to the pain of others, as if they recognize suffering immediately. Others become emotionally numb, as if the mind has built protective walls in order to continue functioning. Both responses are adaptations, and both deserve understanding. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." It is a gentle reminder that our wounds may influence us, but they do not completely define us. Another condition deeply connected to empathy is depression. When people hear the word depression, they often think of sadness. But depression is usually far more complex than that. It may bring exhaustion, emptiness, loss of motivation, a sense of disconnection from oneself and the world. When someone must spend most of their energy simply making it through the day, it can become difficult to direct attention outward, not because they do not care, but because they are already fighting powerful storms within themselves. Interestingly, some people experiencing depression may become overly empathetic. They absorb the emotions of others so easily that they become overwhelmed. They hurt alongside others, worry alongside others, carry burdens that do not belong to them. This reminds us that empathy is not always the same thing as psychological well-being. Balance is what matters most. Anxiety can create similar challenges. When the nervous system remains in a state of constant vigilance, much of our mental energy becomes devoted to anticipating danger. The mind repeatedly asks, what if something goes wrong? What if I make a mistake? What if people judge me? These loops can shrink the space available for genuine presence. An anxious person is not necessarily lacking empathy. In fact, many are highly sensitive to the emotions of others, but sometimes that sensitivity itself becomes a burden. Next, we come to a subject that has often been misunderstood: autism. For many years, society assumed that autistic people lacked empathy. Modern research paints a much more complex picture. Many autistic individuals experience emotions very deeply, sometimes even more intensely than others. What they often find difficult is not feeling, it is decoding complex social signals, subtle facial expressions, unspoken social rules, nuanced emotional cues. Some researchers describe this as a difference in social information processing rather than a simple lack of empathy. And this teaches us an important lesson. Not everyone expresses empathy in the same way. Some express it through eye contact, some through words, some through actions, some through quiet presence. If we judge only what appears on the surface, we may easily misunderstand one another. Jung once wrote, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." Perhaps empathy begins when we slow down enough to resist rushing to conclusions. Another concept that receives far less attention is alexithymia, a condition involving difficulty identifying and describing one's own emotions. A person may feel stressed but not know how to name it, may feel sadness without recognizing it as sadness, may experience emotional pain but describe only physical sensations. When understanding one's own emotional world is difficult, understanding the emotions of others often becomes difficult as well. Not because there is a lack of caring, but because the language of emotion itself feels limited. Yet there is something hopeful here. Alexithymia is not necessarily permanent. Many people improve their emotional awareness through therapy, journaling, meditation, and safe, supportive relationships. Finally, we arrive at a topic that often sparks controversy: psychopathy. Popular culture frequently portrays psychopathy as a complete absence of empathy. Reality, however, is more nuanced. Research suggests that some individuals with psychopathic traits can understand what others are feeling. They may possess cognitive empathy, the ability to understand emotions intellectually, but experience greater difficulty with emotional empathy, the ability to emotionally resonate with another person's feelings. This distinction reminds us that empathy is not a single ability. It is made up of multiple components, and those components can develop differently from person to person. As we reflect on all of this, a profoundly human truth begins to emerge. Empathy does not look the same in everyone. Some people feel quickly, some feel slowly, some express empathy openly, others express it quietly. Some are hindered by trauma, some are limited by biology, some are still learning what life never had the chance to teach them. And perhaps the most beautiful consequence of this understanding is that it helps us become less judgmental, less demanding that everyone be the same, less likely to treat differences as flaws. Jung believed that psychological growth begins with accepting reality, not the reality we wish existed, but the reality that actually exists. And the reality is this: human beings are remarkably different, yet all of us are trying to connect in our own way. When we truly understand that, empathy becomes more than understanding emotions. It becomes respect for the diversity of the human soul. But after understanding these differences, a more practical question naturally emerges. If empathy can be nurtured, if it can grow over time, then what can we actually do each day to become more empathetic? Are there simple habits that quietly expand our ability to understand others? That is the journey we will explore next. Wind 6. the daily practice of empathy. As we concluded the previous chapter, we explored one of the most delicate insights of this entire journey. Empathy does not look the same in everyone. Some people carry wounds from trauma. Some live with anxiety or depression. Some experience the world through uniquely wired nervous systems. Some feel deeply but struggle to express what they feel. Some understand primarily through thought rather than emotion. And perhaps the most important lesson we learned was this: difference does not mean deficiency. Every human being is trying to connect with the world in their own way. Carl Jung believed that growth does not begin by changing other people. It begins by understanding ourselves. Because only when we understand what is happening within our own inner world can we truly be present for the inner world of someone else. But then a very practical question arises. If empathy is a skill, if it can be nurtured, if it is not a gift reserved for a lucky few, what can we do each day to strengthen it? Can empathy be trained like a muscle? Are there small habits that quietly help the heart become more open? The answer is yes. And what is fascinating is that the most powerful practices are often the simplest ones. They require no advanced technology, no expensive courses, no dramatic life changes. Only small moments repeated consistently over time. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Perhaps every practice of empathy begins with that awakening, with returning to ourselves. And the first practice sounds so simple that many people overlook it: slow breathing. In modern life, most of us live in a state of constant hurry. Messages arrive endlessly. Tasks follow tasks. Thoughts pile upon thoughts. Worries follow worries. As a result, the nervous system often behaves as if it is trapped in an endless race. Yet something remarkable happens when stress takes over. Empathy tends to shrink because the brain prioritizes survival over connection. It focuses on threats rather than people. That is why breathing matters so much. One deep breath, one slow exhale, one moment of pause can send signals of safety throughout the body. The heart rate slows, tension softens, attention widens. And only then do we begin to truly listen, not merely with our ears, but with our full presence. Psychologist Stephen Porges, creator of polyvagal theory, spent years studying how the nervous system shapes social connection. His work suggests that a sense of safety forms the foundation of empathy. When the body feels safe, the heart opens more easily. When the heart opens, we begin to see other people more clearly. Perhaps that is why some of the most healing conversations begin not with advice, but with calm presence. Epilogue, a final reflection before sleep. And now, as our long journey gently comes to an end, perhaps the room around you has grown quieter. Perhaps the night has deepened outside your window. Perhaps your breathing has become a little slower than it was when we first began. Throughout this journey, we have wandered through many landscapes of the human mind. We have explored empathy through science, through psychology, through childhood, through relationships, through culture, through stories, through the invisible networks that connect one human heart to another. And after all of these explorations, perhaps we arrive at a surprisingly simple truth. Every person you meet is carrying a world you cannot see, a hidden collection of memories, dreams, fears, disappointments, hopes, private victories, silent struggles, entire chapters of life that remain invisible to everyone around them. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying the mysteries hidden beneath the surface of human experience. And perhaps one of the greatest lessons he left behind is that people are always deeper than they appear. The stranger you pass on the street, the coworker you barely know, the friend who seems cheerful, the family member who sometimes frustrates you, even the person whose opinions are different from your own. Each one is carrying a story, just as you are carrying yours. Perhaps empathy begins with remembering that simple fact. Not every disagreement needs to become a battle. Not every misunderstanding needs to become a judgment. Not every mistake needs to become a permanent label. Sometimes, a little curiosity can reveal an entire hidden world. Sometimes, a moment of listening can soften years of distance. Sometimes, kindness offered at the right moment can become something another person remembers for the rest of their life. And perhaps, just as importantly, empathy can also be directed inward, because there is one person whose struggles you witness every day, one person whose fears you know more intimately than anyone else, one person whose mistakes you remember most clearly. That person is you. Many of us find it easier to forgive others than to forgive ourselves. Easier to offer understanding to a friend than to offer understanding to our own hearts. Yet Jung believed that genuine growth begins not through self-condemnation, but through awareness. Not through endless criticism, but through honest understanding. Perhaps tonight, before sleep arrives, you might allow yourself a small measure of that understanding. You do not need to have everything figured out. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to carry every burden forever. You are simply a human being, learning, growing, trying, just like everyone else. And perhaps that is enough. As the night grows quieter, there is no need to hold tightly to all the ideas we have explored together. You do not need to remember every study, every theory, every concept. You can let them drift gently away, like leaves floating downstream, like clouds slowly crossing a moonlit sky. What remains is something much simpler, a quiet awareness, a gentle reminder that behind every face is a story. Behind every story is a human heart, and behind every heart is the same longing that has always connected our species, the desire to be seen, to be understood, to belong. Perhaps that is why empathy matters so much. Not because it solves every problem, not because it removes every conflict, but because it reminds us that we are not separate, that beneath all our differences, we share far more than we often realize. And now, as this journey reaches its final moments, there is nothing left to do, nothing left to learn, nothing left to solve, only rest. Allow your shoulders to soften, allow your jaw to relax. Allow your breathing to find its own gentle rhythm. Let the thoughts of the day drift farther and farther into the distance. Like tiny lights fading beyond the horizon, the world can wait until morning. The unanswered questions can wait until morning. The unfinished tasks can wait until morning. For now, there is only this moment, this breath, this quiet night, and the simple comfort of knowing that you are here, safe, present, alive. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for sharing this journey through the depths of the human mind and the wisdom of Carl Jung. If these slow and thoughtful stories bring you comfort, don't forget to subscribe and join us again for future journeys into psychology, meaning, history, science, and the hidden mysteries of being human. But for now, take one slow breath in and one slow breath out. Allow your eyes to grow heavy. Allow your thoughts to become soft. Allow sleep to arrive in its own time. May your night be peaceful. May your dreams be gentle. May your heart be at ease. And wherever tomorrow leads you, may you carry a little more understanding, a little more kindness, and a little more empathy into the world. Good night, and sleep well.